Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
The moment I met Jane, it was like the world paused, just for a second, to make sure I took notice. I remember the exact way her smile lit up the corner of the room at that trade fair, like she wasn't just standing under the lights but was commanding them. I'd walked in that day expecting another series of endless conversations about market trends and investment opportunities. I didn't expect her. She was different from anyone I'd ever met, confident without being arrogant, charming but grounded. Jane Foster didn't just have a seat at the table. She owned the damn room without even trying. She had this knack for seeing right through my polished exterior, the one I've perfected after years in investment banking. She didn't care about my title or my success. She cared about me, Franklin Richards, the guy who trips over his words when he's nervous and secretly loves cheesy romantic comedies. Our condo in New York City feels like the life I've always dreamed of, modern, sleek, a little piece of calm in the chaos of Manhattan. But what really makes it home is Jane. She's the one who insisted on adding plants to our living room, even though I swore I'd kill them in a week. Spoiler, they're thriving because she keeps them alive, not me. She brings life to every space she's in. We've been planning the wedding, and every detail feels surreal. In just a few months, I'll be marrying the woman who challenges me, inspires me, and somehow, against all odds, puts up with me. Sometimes I look at her across the table, her brow furrowed as she sips her coffee and pores over some new project for work, and I have to remind myself that this isn't a dream. She's real. She chose me. I still wonder what I did to deserve someone like Jane. She's fiercely independent, insanely talented, and God, she's beautiful. But more than anything, she's the reason I look forward to coming home at the end of a grueling day. And soon, she'll be the reason I say I do and promise her forever. She's it for me. My beginning, my middle, my end. At least that is what I believed, or that is what I had in my mind. Things started to change the moment Laura walked back into Jane's life. I didn't even know Jane had a childhood friend living in Germany until she showed up one evening with a bottle of Riesling and a smirk that made my stomach churn. I wanted to be polite. I really did. For Jane's sake. But from the first words out of Laura's mouth, it was clear. She didn't like me, and I sure as hell didn't like her. She didn't waste any time digging her claws in, making snide remarks about my job, the condo, even the way I held Jane's hand. "You're lucky Jane's so patient," she said once with a condescending grin, like she was daring me to bite back. And believe me, I wanted to. But I knew Jane wouldn't appreciate me losing my temper. Instead, I stayed calm, outsmarting her at every turn. Her digs never landed, and the satisfaction of watching her squirm when I outworded her was almost worth the frustration of her presence. But Laura wasn't just a nuisance. She was a problem. Jane started to change around her. She'd laugh off Laura's comments about how she didn't need a man, or how she could do better than me. At first, I thought it was harmless, just two friends joking around. But then Jane began questioning things about us, about me. Little things at first, like whether I was too controlling about the wedding plans, then bigger things, like whether she needed to find herself before settling down. I could see what was happening. Laura was a bad influence, plain and simple. She didn't believe in relationships, at least not the kind Jane and I had. Laura was the type to glorify independence to the point of isolation, and she was pulling Jane in with her cynicism disguised as empowerment. It wasn't fine with me. I loved Jane, and I knew we were good together. I wasn't some controlling partner trying to clip her wings. I wanted to build a life with her, one where we both thrived. But Laura? She was planting seeds of doubt in Jane's mind, and it was tearing us apart. There were moments when I almost lost it. Once, after one too many of her passive-aggressive jabs in my house, I stood up, fists clenched, and told her she needed to leave. Jane stepped in before I could finish, pleading with me to calm down. "She's my friend, Franklin," she said, her voice trembling. "Why can't you just get along?" It stung because I knew why. I wasn't the issue here, Laura was. But Jane couldn't see it, or maybe she didn't want to. It was causing cracks in our relationship, cracks I didn't know how to fix. Every argument about Laura left us more distant, and every day she stayed in our lives felt like a step further away from the life Jane and I had planned. I could feel her slipping through my fingers, and the worst part? It felt like there was nothing I could do about it. The tension had been simmering for weeks, but when Laura proposed the girls' only trip to Europe a month before the wedding, it felt like someone had dropped a match into a room filled with gasoline. I couldn't believe the audacity of it. Laura, the very person who had been driving a wedge between Jane and me, now wanted to whisk her away right before we were supposed to commit to spending our lives together? It wasn't just disrespectful, it was calculated. Absolutely not. I said, trying to stay calm but failing miserably. We're about to get married, Jane. This isn't the time to go on some escapade with her. Laura, of course, jumped at the chance to paint me as the villain. See? This is exactly what I've been telling you, Jane. He's trying to control your life. This is why men are the worst. They suffocate you, clip your wings, and then expect you to thank them for it. I could feel the heat rising in my chest. The nerve of this woman to stand in my home and act like I was some sort of tyrant. I clenched my fists, willing myself to take the high road, but then she said it again. Control. Like I was nothing more than an obstacle to Jane's freedom. That's when I snapped. You know what, Laura? Maybe your dad should have used a rubber when you were conceived, because you're nothing but a walking disaster. The room went silent. Jane's eyes widened in shock, and for a second, even Laura looked stunned. But then she exploded. She started yelling about how I was toxic, how this was exactly what she'd been warning Jane about, and how no woman deserved to be treated like this. Jane tried to step in, her voice shaky. Franklin, that was uncalled for. Laura is my friend, and you? No. I cut her off, my voice firm but cold. You need to listen to me, Jane. Laura isn't just your friend. She's poison. She's been trying to sabotage us from the moment she walked through that door, and if you can't see that by now, then I don't know what to tell you. Jane opened her mouth to protest, but I wasn't done. If you go on this trip, Jane, then we're done. I'm serious. I'm not going to marry someone who lets someone like her dictate our relationship. Laura is trash, and you deserve better than to let her drag you down with her. I could see the hurt in Jane's eyes, but at that moment, I didn't care. I was furious, not just at Laura but at Jane too, for not standing up for us, for letting this toxic person plant doubts where there should have been trust. Laura stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Jane just stood there, tears welling up, staring at me like she didn't recognize the man in front of her. Maybe she didn't. Maybe I didn't recognize myself, either. But I'd reached my breaking point, and something had to give. Now, the ball was in Jane's court, and for the first time, I wasn't sure what she was going to do. That night started out tense, as most nights had been lately. Laura, ever the disruptor, had called Jane, inviting her to a club for a night of dancing. I could hear the excitement in Jane's voice as she glanced at me, her eyes pleading for permission she didn't even want to admit she was asking for. I didn't even let her finish. No, I said, my tone flat and unwavering. You know how I feel about her. After everything, you're really considering this? Jane sighed, clearly torn. It's just dancing, Franklin. It's not like we're robbing a bank. She's trying to what? Drive a bigger wedge between us? I snapped. Every time you let her pull you into her nonsense, it's another nail in the coffin of what we're building. The silence was deafening. Jane put her phone down and told Laura she wasn't going. But the look on her face wasn't one of agreement. It was resignation. Laura, of course, went to the club alone. And that's when the fight really started. You can't keep controlling my life, Franklin, Jane yelled, her voice breaking. I stayed home for you tonight, but it's like nothing is ever enough. You just want me to cut everyone out until there's no one left but you. I could feel my anger bubbling over. This isn't about control, Jane. It's about respect. About protecting what we have. But if you can't see that, then maybe we're wasting our time here. Before I could say something I'd regret, I grabbed my jacket and walked out, slamming the door behind me. I needed to clear my head, so I called Jake, my oldest and most dependable friend. He was always the one I turned to when life felt like it was spinning out of control. We met at his place, where he was lounging with a beer in hand and a box of snacks on the table. Rough night? He asked with a knowing smirk as he handed me a drink. You have no idea, I muttered, collapsing onto the couch. Jake, in his usual laid-back way, produced a small bag of mushrooms from his kitchen. Maybe this'll help you chill out. It's been a minute since we had a real adventure, huh? Normally, I'd have refused. But tonight? Tonight, I was tired of thinking, tired of feeling, tired of fighting. So, I shrugged and took one. At first, nothing happened. But then the walls seemed to breathe, the colors in the room pulsing like they were alive. Jake was laughing at something, but his voice echoed like it was coming from another dimension. Suddenly, the weight of my anger and frustration lifted, replaced by this overwhelming sensation of interconnectedness. The dream started so vividly that I didn't even realize it was a dream at first. I was back in the condo, pacing the living room, my mind a whirlwind of anger and frustration. Suddenly, the phone rang. I answered it, and Jane's voice was on the other end, shaking with panic. Franklin, it's Laura. She went to the club, and something terrible happened. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I could see the scene playing out in my mind. Laura, alone in that club, surrounded by men with cruel intentions. Jane didn't have to say it, but I knew. Laura had been assaulted. When I got to the hospital, Jane was waiting for me. Her eyes were red and puffy from crying. But when she saw me, they filled with fury. "This is your fault," she spat. "You made her go alone. If you hadn't been so controlling, she wouldn't have been there by herself." "No," I stammered, shaking my head. "I didn't make her go. This isn't on me." But Jane wasn't listening. "You'll pay for this, Franklin," she said, her voice low and cold. "I'll make sure you regret every single thing you've ever done." Despite the ominous warning, the next part of the dream shifted. Somehow, we still got married. I didn't understand it, but there we were, standing at the altar, saying our vows. For a while, life seemed okay, peaceful, even. The fight stopped. Jane smiled more. We were happy, or so I thought. Then came the day at the hospital. Jane was in labor, and I was by her side, holding her hand, feeling a mix of excitement and terror. When the baby was born, the room fell silent. My heart stopped when I saw the child, a beautiful baby, but undeniably mixed race. I turned to Jane, my face pale. What is this?" I asked, my voice shaking. Jane looked at me, a slow, wicked smile spreading across her face. And then she laughed. Not the light, musical laugh I'd fallen in love with, but a cold, mocking sound that sent chills down my spine. "Welcome to your new life, Franklin. Your hell has just begun." The next thing I knew, I was back at the condo. On the kitchen counter were divorce papers, already signed by Jane. She'd claimed everything. The condo, the savings, even the investments I'd worked my entire career to build. Attached to the papers was a restraining order. I was being labeled as a domestic abuser. I tried to fight it, but the system was stacked against me. Word spread quickly, and soon, I lost my job. My colleagues avoided me, my friends stopped calling, and my reputation was in ruins. One day, as I sat in the wreckage of what used to be my life, I saw a photo online. Jane and Laura, sitting together on a beach somewhere, smiling. Laura raised a glass to the camera as if to toast my downfall. In that moment, the weight of everything crushed me. I screamed, the sound raw and broken, but no one was there to hear it. And then I woke up, gasping for air, drenched in sweat. The mushrooms had worn off, and reality came rushing back. It was just a dream, a terrible, twisted nightmare. But the feelings it left behind? Those were real. The anger, the fear, the guilt. I sat there in the dark, wondering if it was a warning. If my worst fears about Laura, about Jane, about everything, weren't just in my head after all. When I got home, the air felt thick, like something was off. And then I saw her, Laura, sitting on my couch, smirking like she owned the place. Jane was in the kitchen, pouring wine, acting like this was completely normal. "Why is she here?" I asked, my voice sharp but controlled. Jane turned, trying to look casual, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. "Laura canceled her plans last night because of everything. So tonight she thought we could hang out. And we decided to go out. Just the two of us." I felt my stomach twist, but instead of letting the anger take over, I smiled. A calm, measured smile that even I didn't expect. "You can go," I said simply. Both Jane and Laura froze, surprised by my reaction. Laura's smirk quickly returned, but there was a flicker of something else. Hesitation, maybe. "Wow," she said, leaning back against the couch. "I guess the boy finally knows his place." I didn't even flinch. "Yes," I said, my voice steady, "but I guess you still need to figure out yours." Her smirk faltered for just a moment, but she covered it up with a laugh. "Whatever," she said, standing up and grabbing her bag. "Come on, Jane. Let's go." Jane looked at me, her eyes searching mine for something. Approval, maybe? Or doubt. But I didn't give her anything. I just stood there, calm and collected, as they walked out the door. The sound of the door clicking shut echoed in the quiet apartment. I stood there for a moment, the smile fading from my face. Let them have their night, I thought. Let them feel like they've won. Because something inside me had shifted. I wasn't going to play this game anymore. But that didn't mean I wasn't planning my next move. The call came at midnight, jolting me out of a restless sleep. Jane's father's voice on the other end was frantic and shaky. "Franklin, you need to come to the hospital. It's Jane and Laura." Something happened. I didn't ask questions. I just threw on my clothes and drove like a madman to the hospital. When I arrived, I found Jane's father pacing in the waiting room, his face pale and full of worry. "She's in there," he said, pointing toward one of the rooms. "They're both saying they were assaulted." My stomach churned, but something about his tone made me pause. It wasn't just worry, it was confusion. I stepped into the room, and there they were. Jane, lying on the hospital bed, looking pale and shaken, and Laura, sitting in a chair beside her, her usual smugness replaced with a thin veneer of distress. "Jane," I said, my voice steady, but cold. "What happened?" Jane avoided my gaze, her hands fidgeting with the hospital blanket. Laura, on the other hand, perked up immediately, her eyes narrowing as she spoke. "What happened?" "We were attacked, Franklin. This is exactly why I said Jane should never have trusted you. If you had been there—" "Stop," I said sharply, cutting her off. I turned to Jane's father, who looked like he was bracing for something. "Mr. Clark, I appreciate your concern, but I'm here to tell you this. The wedding is off. I'll have Jane's clothes packed and sent to your place by morning." Jane's head snapped up, her face a mixture of shock and confusion. "What? Franklin, you can't be serious." Laura jumped to her feet, her outrage immediate. "You're running away because something bad happened to her? You're pathetic." I smiled bitterly, pulling my phone from my pocket. "Oh, I'm not running. I just don't tolerate liars." I tapped the screen a few times and turned the phone toward them. The video played clearly, a security feed from a nearby hotel. It showed Jane and Laura walking arm in arm with a group of men, laughing and flirting as they entered the hotel lobby. An hour later, they emerged, still laughing, and hailed a cab. "According to the doctors," I said, my voice low but cutting, "there's no evidence of any assault. None. And now we both know why." Jane's face went pale, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Franklin, it's not what it looks like." "It's exactly what it looks like," I interrupted. "You and your best friend cooked up some story because you didn't want to face the consequences of your own actions. But I'm done. I don't marry liars. And I certainly don't marry someone who would disrespect me like this." Laura's face twisted into rage, but before she could say anything, I silenced her with a glare. "You've done enough damage. To Jane. To me. But you won't get another second of my time." I turned on my heel and walked out of the room, leaving behind the sound of Jane sobbing and Laura sputtering in indignation. By the time I got to my car, I felt an odd sense of relief. It was over. Whatever spell Jane had over me was broken, and I could finally see clearly. Sometimes, the hardest decisions are the ones that set you free. It had been a few days since I'd walked out of that hospital, leaving Jane and Laura behind. The weight of everything still hung over me, but I was determined to move on. That night, as I walked back to my apartment from a late meeting, I felt the distinct sensation of being followed. I turned a corner into a dimly lit alley. Stupid, I know, but I wanted to confront whoever it was. That's when it happened. A man lunged at me, a knife glinting in his hand. Fortunately for him, I've been a black belt in judo for years, and muscle memory kicked in. With a quick sidestep and a well-placed throw, I disarmed him and pinned him to the ground. He squirmed beneath me, cursing and yelling, but I didn't let up. "Who sent you?" I demanded, my voice ice-cold. The man hesitated, his face twisting with a mix of anger and shame. "Laura," he spat finally. "She said you ruined her and Jane's life. Told me to teach you a lesson." My grip tightened. "And you agreed to this? Why?" "I'm her lover," he said, his words dripping with defiance. "One of the guys from the hotel that night." "Jane, Laura." "Me? It wasn't what you think, man. We all had fun. Laura she wanted to get back at you after what you pulled." My stomach churned, but I kept my composure. "You have proof of this?" The man smirked, clearly proud of himself. "Hell yeah. I got videos. Figured they might be useful someday." I yanked him to his feet, pushing him against the alley wall. "Show me," I ordered. With trembling hands, he pulled out his phone and scrolled through his gallery. Sure enough, there they were. Videos of Laura and Jane, laughing and drinking with him and his friends. The images turned more explicit, confirming everything I'd already suspected. I grabbed his phone and sent the files to myself before tossing it back to him. "Get out of my sight," I said, my voice low and dangerous. He hesitated for a moment, clearly weighing his options, but the look in my eyes must have convinced him. He turned and bolted, leaving me standing alone in the alley, the weight of what I'd just uncovered settling over me. As I walked back to my apartment, my mind raced. I had the proof now, not just of their lies, but of their sheer malice. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it yet, But one thing was certain, this wasn't over. The next morning, I heard a knock at my door. I wasn't surprised when I opened it and found Jane standing there, her face a mix of defiance and desperation. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "We need to talk," she said sharply. "Make it quick," I replied, leaning against the counter, my expression blank. She took a deep breath and launched into it. "You need to marry me, Franklin. You owe me that." "My child." I cut her off. "Your child?" "Yes," she snapped. "My child needs a father. You may not want to do the right thing, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't." I couldn't help but laugh, the sound bitter and cold. "Let's not pretend this is about morality, Jane. You're looking for a meal ticket, not a father for your kid. But let's clear one thing up. If you're so sure this is my child, let's get a DNA test." Her face hardened. "No, I'm not subjecting myself or my baby to your ridiculous accusations." "Then I have my answer," I said, pushing off the counter. "There's nothing more to discuss. Get out." Jane's demeanor shifted instantly, her voice dropping into a dangerous tone. "You think you can just walk away from this, Franklin? If you don't marry me, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man you are. I'll file assault charges, harassment, abuse, whatever it takes. You might be able to fight the charges, but by the time it's over, your career, your reputation, all gone." I smiled, a slow, deliberate grin that caught her off guard. Without a word, I turned my laptop around so she could see the screen. Her expression changed from anger to confusion, then to horror as the video started to play. There she was, with Laura and the men from the hotel, clear as day, laughing, drinking, and eventually engaging in the kind of behavior she'd been so eager to lie about. You recorded this?" she stammered. "No," I said, my tone calm. "Your boyfriend from that night was happy to share. But there's more." I clicked on another file, and the room was filled with her own voice, threatening me with false charges, spelling out her plan to ruin me if I didn't comply. Jane's face turned white as I opened an email draft on the screen. The files were attached, and the recipients were listed: her employer, her family, and the authorities. "Let me show you how serious I am," I said, my finger hovering over the mouse. With one click, I sent the email, watching as the notification confirmed it had gone through. Jane's hands trembled as she stepped back, her voice barely a whisper. You can't do this." I leaned closer, my voice low and steady. "Get out of here, Jane. Go fight the fire I just lit. And don't ever come near me again." She turned and stumbled out the door, her panic visible in every step. 2 days later, the nightmare I thought I had closed the door on came knocking, literally. Jane and Laura stood at my doorstep, faces set with anger and determination. Against my better judgment, I let them in, if only to avoid them causing a scene in the hallway. "What do you want now?" I asked, folding my arms and leaning against the door. Jane spoke first, her voice strained. "You owe me, Franklin, for the time we spent together, for everything I gave up to be with you." I blinked at her in disbelief before a bitter laugh escaped my lips. "Oh, you? Are you serious? Jane, are you a prostitute now? Because that's the only way this demand makes any sense." Her face flushed with shame, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw the old Jane, the one who might have felt remorse or regret. But then she steeled herself. "I deserve something for everything I went through." I shook my head, my patience wearing thin. "You deserve exactly what you've earned, which is nothing from me. Now, both of you need to leave before I call the cops." Laura, as always, couldn't keep her mouth shut. She stepped forward, her voice rising. "You think you're better than us? You're just a spineless man who hides behind his money. If you're not going to give Jane what she deserves, at least help me. I need a loan." That caught me off guard. "A loan? You've got to be kidding me." Laura's tone shifted, desperate now. "I'm in debt to someone dangerous. If I don't pay up, it's my life on the line." I stared at her, letting the silence stretch before replying. "You don't know how to ask, do you?" Her confusion turned to anger. "What? If you want my help, you'll have to learn some humility," I said coldly. Laura hesitated, then slowly dropped to her knees, her face a mixture of fury and humiliation. "Please," she said through gritted teeth, "help me." I leaned down, meeting her eyes with a smirk. "Now you know your place." I reached into my pocket, pulled out a $1 bill, and tossed it onto the floor in front of her. "That's all you're worth. Take it and get out." Jane stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, as Laura's face twisted in rage. She lunged at me, her scream echoing through the room, but I was ready. I had already called the cops when I saw them approaching my door, and right on cue, there was a knock. The officers stepped in, separating Laura from me as she thrashed and shouted obscenities. Jane tried to defend her, but the officers weren't having it. After a brief explanation and a quick review of the security footage from my building, they placed both women in handcuffs. As they were led away, Jane turned to look at me, her eyes filled with a mix of betrayal and despair. "This isn't over, Franklin," she spat. I stood in the doorway, watching as they disappeared down the hall. "Oh, it's over," I muttered to myself, closing the door behind them. For the first time in weeks, my home felt peaceful again. A few days later, as I was heading home, something unexpected caught my attention. A pair of screams pierced the air, sharp and desperate. I turned my head to see two women being dragged by several men toward a car. One of the women, though I couldn't see her clearly at first, screamed Jane's name, and then I heard the unmistakable sound of her voice. "That's my boyfriend. He'll give you the money." I froze, my heart skipping a beat. I knew that voice. Without thinking, I stepped closer, trying to make sense of the scene. One of the men turned toward me, his face hardened with menace. "Are you her boyfriend?" he asked, his tone flat but dangerous. I stared at him for a moment, taking in the situation. Then, with a slight shrug, I answered, "Nope, never seen that woman." The man paused, then grinned, as if my response had been the punchline of a joke. "Well, then she's going to pay the right way." With that, they shoved Jane and the other woman into the back of the car, the engine roaring to life. The men climbed in, the car peeling away from the curb in a cloud of exhaust. I stood there for a moment, watching the car disappear around the corner, a strange mix of emotions swirling within me. I could have done something, maybe. I could have tried to intervene, tried to help, but the truth was, I felt nothing for Jane anymore, and the thought of getting tangled in her mess again made my stomach turn. Turning away from the street, I walked back to my apartment, the sound of the car fading into the distance. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The past was finally behind me, and I was done being dragged back into it. It was time to move on. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
She's creating opportunities to meet me even now, and I have no idea how incredibly cute and lovely she is. She is the wife of James, my closest friend at the company. I've been working at my first job since graduating from college. And although I'm in a different department now, James was both my mentor at work and my senior in college. Now that his wife has become a significant part of my life, let me tell you about her. Her name is Sophia. She's of average height with a slender figure. Before having their son, she worked as an elementary school special skills teacher. Sophia has a gentle and kind way of speaking that makes everyone around her feel at ease. Our company is small, so we often have dinners with other departments. After one such dinner, we ended up at a karaoke bar, and James got so drunk we had to catch a taxi to his place. By the time we arrived, James had sobered up and called his wife to say he was bringing a colleague home and asked if we could have a drink together. I told James to rest at home, but he insisted on not sending me away without expressing his gratitude. When we arrived at James' apartment, I met his wife, Sophia, who is 3 years older than him. They got married right after James started his job. Sophia is 4 years older than me, the most beautiful woman with the best skin I've ever seen. It's so inspiring how James, having such a pretty and kind wife, makes me respect him even more. Sophia greeted me with a kind voice. It was late at night after a company dinner, and although she might have been upset with her husband for bringing a colleague home so late, she didn't say a single harsh word to him in front of me. Seeing Sophia uphold her husband's dignity made me want to find a woman like her and start a family someday. That night, we had cookies and wine that Sophia had prepared. It turns out, despite her innocent appearance, Sophia loves to drink. She was happy that her husband had asked to prepare some drinks, saying she was already thinking about having some. James couldn't stop bragging about his wife. Since she only works part-time, she spends a lot of time at home, and lately, she's been taking an interest in household management, even doing a complete cleanup. She told me that since I'm close with her husband, I should just call if I ever want to have a drink, and she'll prepare something if possible. I was always envious of my colleague James, who had a beautiful and kind-hearted wife. James, generous as he was, often invited me over to his house once a month, insisting that instead of staying home alone, we should spend some quality time together. So, I found myself bringing beer or desserts to James's place, making those visits a highlight of my month. I lived just a 15-minute walk from James's house. Since my parents lived in the countryside, I rented a place in the city, and having James in the same neighborhood meant we often commuted together. One snowy day, having forgotten my wallet, I couldn't buy an umbrella and ended up walking in the heavy snow. James called his wife, Sophia, saying, "Let's build a snowman. I'm with William, bring some gloves." That day, we had a blast, like kids, having snowball fights and building a beautiful snowman. Drenched as we were, James offered us to shower and stay over, but I felt too bad to accept. However, Sophia insisted, pulling me along. That evening turned into a beer party, and James, feeling sleepy, went to bed early. Sophia then handed me some fresh underwear for guests, telling me to have a nice shower and sleep over. After my shower, Sophia remarked, "You have a better physique than my husband. Whoever ends up being William's wife is going to be very lucky." Curiously, I asked Sophia what she found attractive in men, to which she replied that I was a good listener and had a great sense of humor. Making a snowman and diving into childhood memories seemed to wash away my fatigue, leading to a deep sleep. Waking up at dawn, I tidied up the bed and quietly returned home. Life at work was a continuous stress. James was overjoyed to share that Sophia was pregnant, though he was worried about her severe morning sickness. Remembering how my sister dealt with her morning sickness by eating biscuits, I bought a bunch and gave them to Sophia. Soon, I received a text from an unknown number. It was Sophia saying the biscuits had helped with her morning sickness, and she could now eat a bit more. Grateful, she had asked for my contact information. Having 3 sisters, I've picked up a lot of tips. "Please tell your niece or nephew they'll have a fun uncle to play with," I said, as we ended the call. James has always been excited about the arrival of his new baby, telling me I should find a good woman and start a family soon. We've remained close friends. He had to leave on a business trip abroad for 10 days and asked me to take good care of his pregnant wife. Over the weekend, while I was relaxing at home, Sophia called me. "Do you have time today? My brother gave me 2 tickets to this popular comedy movie. Want to join me?" I was pondering what to do over the weekend, so her call was a pleasant surprise. After watching the movie and having dinner, I drove her home. She mentioned feeling lonely and invited me to stay over for a while. I was delighted and gladly accepted. Sophia's baby bump looked so beautiful. She thanked me for the date, saying it was comforting to have someone to rely on, and asked me to keep it a secret from James. With a laugh, she confided that her body felt better, but her husband was being overly cautious, which was a bit frustrating. Understanding her hint, I spent the night with her. We met almost daily until James returned. Enjoying a different kind of companionship, Sophia was touched by my sensitivity towards a pregnant woman's feelings, even shedding tears of gratitude. I wondered if this was okay, but seeing Sophia happy made me happy too. After the baby was born, James had to travel to China for 6 months. Both families lived far away, leaving Sophia without much support for childcare, which overwhelmed her. James asked me to help if Sophia or the baby needed anything. I visited Sophia without her asking and ended up helping raise the child. Sophia, who was slim and pretty, gained some weight after childbirth. I reassured her, saying her fuller figure was more attractive. She looked beautiful as a mother. After putting the baby to sleep, we enjoyed our time together. Honestly, I wish James would return even later. Sophia seems to share the sentiment, but deep down, I know we should end this affair soon. Yet, leaving the lovely and beautiful Sophia for another woman seems too difficult.
Husband caught his wife cheating on camera and took immediate revenge, uncovering a deeper betrayal. Tuesday evenings were consistently busy, particularly on the second Tuesday of each month, when I had my Kawas Club meeting from 6:30 onwards. May and I typically didn't get home until around 5 or 5:30. Since Kawas was a dinner gathering, I didn't have to worry about cooking, but May, my wife of 4 years, always had some last-minute tasks she needed me to handle before I could leave. The real challenge, however, was my own struggle. According to May, she was 3 months pregnant and dealing with wild hormones. Despite her pregnancy, she remained the captivating woman I had married, now with the radiant glow of impending motherhood. It was especially difficult for me to tear myself away from her, even for a brief evening. She was perfect to me, standing at 5 feet 3 inches, weighing 110 lbs, with light brown hair and stunning blue eyes. Her physical appearance complimented me, but I cherished her for much more than just her looks. She possessed a sharp wit and keen observational skills, though her beauty certainly didn't hurt. Regardless, I had to be out the door by 6:10 to make it to the meeting on time, which meant rushing through a shower, getting dressed, giving May a quick kiss, and then heading out. I usually didn't return home until after 11, often closer to midnight. Tonight's meeting didn't seem like it would be any different. After a hurried shower, I threw on some slacks and a sports shirt, grabbed my briefcase, and made my way through the kitchen to the garage, planting a kiss on the back of May's neck and giving her a reassuring squeeze to steady her. I reluctantly left her behind and headed out. It was tempting to skip the meeting, not just for May's sake, but also because I had a project underway in the garage. I had been installing a baby monitor for the nursery to be, estimating that it would take me about 30 minutes to finish and then proudly show it off to my wife. She always appreciated my small accomplishments, and I didn't mind soaking in the praise, even if it was somewhat misplaced. After all, I was a guy, and a little ego stroking from my woman didn't hurt. As I settled into the car, I activated the garage door opener and started the engine. While the car purred to life, I placed my briefcase on the seat beside me and double-checked that I had everything I needed. Cell phone, calculator, notebook, all accounted for. Then I reversed out of the garage and down the driveway, waving to May through the kitchen window as she washed dishes. She waved back as I reached the street. Before I could shift the car into gear or even close the garage door with a remote, my cell phone rang, halting all movement. As I answered it, greeting the caller, I glanced up to wave to May one more time, but she had already disappeared from view. The voice on the other end conveyed that I was caught at a good time. The caller informed me that tonight's meeting was canceled. Our president, Patrick, along with Everett and Jules, had been called out of town. With the key officers absent, it was decided to cancel this month's gathering. There was nothing planned for tonight unless I had something urgent. Needless to say, I was relieved to have the evening free. I simply reversed back into the garage, noticing that May's face hadn't reappeared in the kitchen window of our 3-bedroom home. She later admitted she hadn't left the kitchen, anticipating my return to surprise her. If she had been anywhere else, she wouldn't have heard me drive back into the garage. After entering the garage, I finally closed the garage door and then sat in the car, taking a few minutes to relax. I decided to order pizza for dinner tonight, instead of cooking myself, allowing me to focus on finishing the monitor. All aspects regarding the camera and the nursery were completed, except for some garage connections and final testing. The nursery's cosmetic adjustments were minor, The camera, mounted discreetly in a corner, had gone unnoticed by May for 10 days due to its small size. I'd attend to those tasks another time. May had mentioned casually how convenient a nursery monitor would be for checking on the baby while it napped, prompting me to wire the house accordingly. I also opted to install sound monitors in each room. The idea for the visual monitor in the baby's room came from seeing some equipment a friend was discarding. While the main controls were in our bedroom, I installed a secondary set in the garage where I spent a fair amount of time working, complete with speakers and an old TV, acting as the video monitor. This setup allowed for flexible monitoring of the nursery from anywhere in the house. As mentioned, the project was nearly complete, needing only a minor adjustment before I could surprise May and unwind for the night. I decided to try completing the work before relaxing in front of the TV or spending time with May. I stepped out of the car and began checking my work. After about 20 minutes, everything seemed to be functioning properly, so I began testing the sound feeds. Each could be controlled individually, or I could route them all to the 5 second-hand speakers above my workstation. Testing them one by one, starting with the living room, they all worked perfectly, with impressive sensitivity. I could even hear May showering in the master bedroom. I set them all to be live and feeding into the garage, then proceeded to make the final connections for the video monitor. I got somewhat lost in my wiring checks when I heard someone speaking through the living room speaker, sounding like May on the phone. Curious, I turned up the sound and found it to be perfectly clear. The $12 spent on the 5 speakers was indeed a bargain. May conveyed to Roger through the speaker that it would be appreciated if he could be there by 7. My wife's voice affirmed, "It's on, lover." In response, Roger assured May, "Okay, love, I'll see you then. Don't you dare be late. We won't have near enough time as it is, and no, don't figure on getting a repeat." After a brief pause, May giggled and hung up the phone. What was that about? Who was Roger? The only Roger I knew was Roger Jenkins, Crystal's husband. Crystal was May's college roommate and still her best friend. Roger and I got along well. He was a fun guy. I guessed he and May were planning something for Crystal. Well, I'd find out soon enough. It was only 15 minutes until 7. Abandoning speculation, I pressed the camera's on button in the baby's room and reclined with a satisfied smile. The monitor displayed the spare bedroom, where the camera focused on the queen-sized bed, surprisingly made up with turned-down sheets. It was the first time I'd seen May do this without expecting guests. Adjusting the video controls, I zoomed the camera in and out. At the widest zoom, everything in the bedroom was visible, except the corner where the camera was fixed near the ceiling. Leaving it at that setting, I critically examined the clear image, capturing the door, window, closet, and the well-framed bed. Content with my work, I started tidying my workbench, pleased with the sound and picture system I had created. Retrieving a beer from the old refrigerator, I relaxed in my $150 recliner, a garage edition my wife wouldn't allow in the house but fit perfectly in the garage. Almost finishing the beer, contemplating ordering pizza and planning to surprise May, the front doorbell interrupted my thoughts. A moment later, May greeted the visitor and expressed her impatience. She invited Roger to come in, mentioning they had until 10:30 before it was over. May assured him that until then, she was his all the way. The shock didn't come from the words, but from the husky tone in my wife's voice, a sound I'd only heard in our bedroom or on our way there. It was her closeness, her seductive voice. Choking on the last sip of beer, I sat up abruptly. The front door closed and May's voice continued, informing Roger that, judging by the bulge in his pants, she wasn't the only one who had a hard time. "It looks really good," she said, asking him to come over and give her a real hello. Roger responded, and a few grunts and moans followed. Then May's voice again, directing him not to stay there, but to come back to our room because she had it all set up for them. I felt sick to my stomach. It seemed like May was leading him back to our bedroom. Confused and unsure of what to do, my initial urge was to burst into the kitchen and eject Roger from the house. But what was the reality? I took a deep breath. It couldn't be what it sounded like. May and I were deeply in love, and I was certain she had been as faithful as I had been. While she teased me about admiring other women, I knew it was just harmless looking. I never felt the urge to stray, and we were compatible lovers. She always had everything she desired in our closeness moments. Multiple climaxes were her norm, and I made sure to satisfy her until she indicated otherwise. This had to be a misunderstanding on my part. She was my best friend, and we were expecting a baby together. Sitting in the worn-out lounger, I noticed movement on the baby's room monitor. The door opened, and May gently directed Roger into the room with the prepared bed, maneuvering him to the other side, between the bed and the window. She swayed back to stand in front of the closed closet doors, looking across the bed at Roger and almost directly into the camera. May wore her worn-out Saturday-Sunday morning robe, reaching just mid-thigh. However, her hair was styled in a sophisticated bun atop her head, accentuating her slender throat. With just the right amount of makeup, she resembled a princess, except for the ratty old worn-out robe. On her feet were the high-heeled slippers I had gifted her for her birthday 2 months ago, although she wore them that evening, and I had complimented how they enhanced her legs. I couldn't recall seeing them outside her closet since then. As soon as this thought hit me, I realized I hadn't spotted them out of her closet since then, and I felt like I was on the verge of tears. This couldn't be happening. Across the bed from one of my best friends, my wife stood tall and proud, making direct eye contact. Her hands slowly rose to the robe's throat, and with her left hand she held it closed at the neckline. Using her right hand, she unsnapped each button, allowing the robe to billow out, teasing Roger with glimpses inside. Undoing all the buttons while continuing to hold the robe closed, she brought her right hand back to her throat. Using both hands, she slowly peeled the robe open, standing for a moment to let us admire the vision framed by the robe. Then, she let her hands drop, shrugging her shoulders, allowing the robe to drop and puddle around her feet. She was wearing the lingerie I had given her on Valentine's Day, which she had modeled for me on that special day. Since then, I had not seen it. Still maintaining eye contact with Roger, she raised a hand and gestured for him to come to her. As he turned around the bed, I observed my former friend's stunned face. He stammered that he was expecting to be with May tonight, but she had made it really special for him. He expressed how beautiful she was, mentioning, "God, but you are beautiful." They both disrobed. Suddenly emerging from my day's depression, I knew I would need proof of the unfolding situation. After a moment of thought, I hastened into the now empty living room, working quietly and quickly. Obtaining a fresh SD card, I returned to the garage, connected it to the monitor, and switched everything back on. The monitor displayed Roger and my wife, and tears welled up as I watched them move to the bed, embracing tightly. They engaged in an act of intimacy that seemed to last forever, with Roger driving into her relentlessly. After about 15 minutes, she attempted to pull away. Staring at the distressing scene on the monitor, I stood up and began pacing. I knew that entering the house would lead to a violent outcome. I felt sick to my stomach and completely unable to decide what to do next. "Roger, unless you want Gary to walk in on us, you have to go now," May said. She bent, picked up his clothes, and handed them to him, gathering the remains of the lingerie she had given him, along with herself, placing everything on the dresser. I watched as May threw on her old robe and stripped the sheets off the bed, not even waiting for Roger to finish dressing before bundling them up and taking them to the washer in the laundry room between the kitchen and garage. Upon her return to the living room, Roger was present, and with the boastful, melodious tone men often adopt, he greeted her. He expressed that it was great and suggested they talk about doing it again. She replied firmly, stating that she meant it when she said just the once, and only because of their deal. Roger acknowledged her decision, adding, "Perhaps for old time's sake too." He expressed understanding, saying that it was just for once, but if she ever thought about how great it was, maybe they could try it again. I heard the sounds of another sloppy kiss before Roger's footsteps seemed to fade as he went to the door. I could hear the impatience in my wife's voice and the little sounds she was making, but it didn't register at the time. Nor did the exhalation she made when she finally followed him to the door. Literally sick to my stomach, I lay back in the ratty recliner, looking at the now empty bedroom showing on the monitor. Glancing at my watch, I saw it was 10:37. They had stayed to their time schedule very well. I heard Roger murmuring something at the door, and I clearly heard May reply that it was just the one time and only because of their agreement so many years ago. She emphasized that I was her husband, her lover, and the man she wanted in her life. She expressed uncertainty about why they did it now and mentioned that Crystal, despite being okay with this, was her best friend and more important than an affair. She questioned Roger about Crystal's importance to him. I couldn't understand Roger's mumble, but I heard another kiss, and then the door shut quietly. Almost immediately, I heard the lock click home. If I hadn't been so filled with tears and despair, I think the exhaustion in Roger's voice after his session with my wife would have been funny. At the moment, it certainly didn't seem funny at all. After the door shut, May reappeared in the spare bedroom. I couldn't seem to think of it as the baby's room anymore. She quickly went over the room, carefully making sure nothing was amiss after the tryst. Gathering up her clothes, she disappeared into the hall. And I soon heard her in our bedroom. I listened to her shower, and then she was out, and I heard the bed rustle. It sounded like my wife had gone to bed. Glancing at my watch, I saw it was almost 11. I just sat and stared into space. I had no idea where my life and my wife were going from here. I only knew I was heartsick. Thoughts and ideas crowded through my head. In some, I thought of things that would excuse my wife for what she had done. In others, I answered the excuses. And yet, in others, I asked myself what I had done to cause May to need another man. Sometime after midnight, I wearily arose and turned the electronics off. Entering the house through the garage door, I headed directly to the master bedroom. Passing the spare room where my wife had been with Roger, I glanced in. The room was just as I had last seen it Monday evening. The bed was stripped, and nothing seemed out of place. There was nothing to tell that anything had taken place. Groaning to myself, I entered my bedroom. Glancing at my sleeping wife, I went to the bathroom, brushed my teeth, and did my business. Stripping off my clothes and leaving them in the dirty clothes hamper before dropping them in, I glanced in, and the hamper was empty. No soiled lingerie there. When I climbed into bed, my wife rolled over and threw an arm over me. She sleepily asked how my night had been. After a moment's silence, I told her it had been very traumatic, but I would tell her about it later. Usually, she snuggled up to me. Tonight, however, she just lay quietly, pulling her arm back and rolling over with her back to me. She seemed to fall back asleep immediately, though, listening to her breathing. I thought she was still awake. I just rolled away from her, then stared into the darkness. I don't know how much I slept that night. I couldn't remember actually sleeping at all. When the alarm went off, I just lay there. I was certainly in no shape to go to work. Telling May I thought I had the flu, I stayed in bed until I heard her car leave for work. I got up and began carefully opening drawers, being sure not to displace anything as I searched May's dresser. In the bottom drawer, folded and stored in a paper bag and under some sweaters, was the lingerie Roger had enjoyed. I pulled them out, noting the lap of the ruined underwear was still damp. After calling in sick to my boss, I played back the tape I had recorded the previous night. Initially, I fast-forwarded through it, avoiding a rehash of the experience and ensuring the tape's quality. However, as time passed, I began to notice details I had overlooked initially. The morning was spent scrutinizing the video content, and I made 2 duplicate kits along with 2 phone calls. Upon returning home, I realized I hadn't eaten since the previous day's lunch. Missing dinner and feeling queasy about breakfast, I skipped meals. When May arrived at her usual time, around 4:30, she came in to kiss me. I turned away, prompting her to give me a peculiar look. Eventually, at 5:30, I decided to confront the issue head-on. There was no sense in delaying it further, only causing more distress for myself. I asked May if she could spare a few minutes to show her what I had been doing for the baby monitor we were discussing. Her response was to wait until after dinner because she was just about to put it on. I picked up my cell phone and inquired about her dinner preference. She suggested Chinese, and I promptly ordered it for delivery. Then I brought her into the bedroom, demonstrating the controls on the console behind the door. I left the sound on, moving from room to room while communicating with her over the monitor. Although she couldn't respond, the smile on her face upon my return indicated that it was working better than planned. Turning on the video feature, I instructed her to wait and watch. I then stepped into the spare room and stood where she had been the previous night. I grimaced and mimicked a slow bump and grind before returning to our bedroom. She exclaimed, "Gary, that's perfect! When did you get this going?" I responded that I got it going this afternoon, actually, the previous night. She wore a puzzled smile, seemingly trying to recall when I had found time to set it up. I told her there was one more thing to show her and took her hand, leading her to the garage. I explained that since I spend a lot of time there, I thought it was a good idea to have a monitoring station to cover the baby when she has to go out. Then I activated the system in the garage. Recalling something from the night before, I added, "One thing, let me show you how it works." I inserted a USB drive into the TV. "Watch the bedroom and see what happens," I told her. Watching the monitor, we saw the same view as from our bedroom, the initial scene of an empty room, though now the bed was unmade. Then I used the remote to turn on the TV, and the picture immediately changed to show May on her knees before Roger. Glancing at her face, I saw the color drain from it, and she seemed to sway before catching her balance. She looked suddenly at me, and I just stared into her eyes, then pushed fast forward, stopping in just a couple of seconds. I gestured for her to watch the screen again. When she looked back, she saw Roger grabbing at her underwear. Although there was no sound, we could see May say something to him. We both watched, and then heard the small scream she gave, which I now realized was pain. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw tears running down May's face, and also noticed the slight cringe when she saw again the rough way Roger had driven himself into her. Stopping the video, I asked if she wanted to see any more. My wife just looked helplessly at me. I requested May to come inside the house. Feeling the need for a serious conversation and uncertainty about where things were headed, I guided her into the kitchen, where I seated her at the kitchen table and took a seat at the end of the table next to her. May mumbled through tears that she could explain, and I responded that I needed an explanation. I asked about the explanation, questioning May about a promise she made to Roger back in college. I wanted to know how many years ago she had promised herself to him. May began to explain, saying it wasn't like that. She and Roger had been dating while he had a reputation as a lady executor. May mentioned that she started rooming with Crystal, and Roger began dating both of them for a while. She elaborated on the dynamics between Crystal, Roger, and herself, mentioning that Roger and Crystal were heading toward a serious relationship. May recounted a conversation with Roger one night in her room where they got more risque as they drank. In that conversation, she revealed to Roger that the only reason they hadn't been intimate was her fear of getting pregnant. May explained Roger's expectation for his partners to be on the pill and mentioned her reluctance to be too liberal with her favors. May continued her explanation, recalling that she and Roger argued, and she wrote a promissory note stating that if she could be sure he couldn't get her pregnant, she would spend an evening in bed with him. When she paused, I was staring incredulously at her. "How long ago was this?" I asked. "About 6 years," was her answer. May went on to tell me that the note was one of the jokes between Roger and her ever since. Then we broke the news of her pregnancy to Roger and Crystal 2 weeks ago, and after the initial congratulations, Roger and I had gone into their garage to look at a problem he was having. Once I was out of the room, Crystal had looked her in the eye and told her the promissory note must now be due. May was shocked that Crystal even knew about it, and stunned to discover that Crystal was taking it seriously. When Roger and I came back, I remembered a case of Dutch beer I had been going to bring to the cookout, insisting it would only take a few minutes to get something special. I left the other 3 there and went home alone to pick up the beer. While I was gone, Crystal had raised the topic of the note again. May was surprised again to find that Roger had apparently believed the note was going to be honored. He was quite indignant to hear May was thinking of welshing on the agreement. This was all taking place after 3 hours of steady drinking, the last she would have until our baby finished breastfeeding. May found herself agreeing to honor the old note before I returned. It had been decided between the 3 of them that she would entertain Roger last night. I expressed to May that her story was one of the strangest I've ever heard, and it was challenging for me to accept. I asked her who the father of the baby she was carrying was. May shrank, and tears began falling down her cheeks again. My next question was about how many other notes were now outstanding and how many she had paid up on to date. May screamed at me saying there were none and pleaded with me, "Gary, don't. I love you, Gary." She assured me that it was a singular instance and wouldn't recur. May pleaded with me to hear her out, acknowledging that trying to explain might sound absurd, but she felt obligated to do so. She emphasized that it wasn't planned or desired, and she had never been unfaithful to me. May pleaded with me to believe her. She dropped to her knees in tears, covering her face. I asked May if I could ask her some questions, and if she would be honest. She responded affirmatively, urging me to ask her. May emphasized that it was a one-time thing and not something she wanted to do. She admitted that doing it seemed incredible to her now, but I was worth more to her than life. I gazed at her kneeling before me, my heart aching and my stomach in knots. This was my best friend, the person I wanted beside me for life, but I had to know if she was who I thought she was. I asked May if she could have said no to this. She replied that she could have, but she felt her honor was involved. May explained that she was afraid to tell me, fearing that I wouldn't understand. She expressed that she felt if I were in her place, I would do the same thing. She clarified that when the agreement was made, she was drunk, but when she was sober, she didn't throw it out. When it was made, she didn't know me, and it wasn't something she did to cheat on me. It was something she promised to a friend so dear at the time in that place, and she believed it was right. After pondering, I responded that she could have said no after sobering up, but felt it was right and owed a debt to the man her friend became over these years. I asked if that was correct, and she affirmed it. I asked her to think carefully if this was something she was looking forward to, and she replied with a shout that after a while, she began thinking it wasn't real, just a joke. However, she realized it wasn't a joke, it was real. Staring into her eyes, I inquired about the past 2 weeks, whether she was looking forward to it. May took a deep breath and answered that she wasn't. She explained it was something she felt she had to do out of obligation, not pleasure. I continued to look at her, and May, looking down at the table, whispered, "Okay, yes, Gary, I guess I was looking forward to it, but not in the way you might be thinking." She clarified that she had never thought of cheating on me, never wanted to. However, all of a sudden, this situation was there. She felt she had to go through with it, and if she did, she saw no reason not to enjoy it. She stressed that she never felt it was something she had to do because I was not enough for her. It was something she had to honor, so she rationalized that she might as well make it special because nothing like it would ever happen again. Taking a shuddering breath, I let it out slowly. I brought up a memory about 6 weeks ago when I called May on my cell phone while driving back from a conference. We teased for a few minutes, and then I asked her to meet me at the Holiday Inn in Atherton. I suggested making it a weekend away from home, maybe having some fun. I asked if she remembered, and she responded affirmatively, mentioning it was a great weekend with a tremulous smile. I then questioned if she wanted to make that a great weekend for us, for me. May expressed, "What a question." Of course I did, and it was. We had a great time, giving me a genuine smile this time. I followed up by asking if she recalled what she packed for that weekend. She mentioned taking a nice dress in case we wanted to go dancing, which we did, and some comfortable clothes to walk in. I told her to wait a minute, explaining that I needed to turn the video on again to help her understand what this question was about. I turned and walked back to our bedroom, checking midway down the hall to ensure she was following me and she was still there. I powered up the bedroom TV and pressed play on the remote. The scene unfolded with May still kneeling before Roger. She rose and turned to the bed, facing the camera in the corner, capturing her actions. I inquired about what she was wearing, and blushing, May replied that she had on her white lingerie, the set from Valentine's Day. She mentioned that I had never seen her wear it for me except when she modeled it after I gave it to her. May explained that there had been no place to wear it and then paused, looking confused. I reminded her that she didn't wear it at the Holiday Inn. She changed into a peasant skirt and a white blouse. Later, she wore white cotton underwear and a bra, probably the same ones she had on now. I asked if she recalled what she wore to bed that night, and in a small voice she replied that she wore her Donald Duck t-shirt. Looking into her eyes, I questioned May about the holiday weekend, stating that she mentioned it was special, and the date with Roger wasn't. Yet I pointed out that she wore one of the handsomest things she owned, something I bought for us to share, with Roger, not for me. I inquired how special she thought she was placing me. May slumped her shoulders and just looked at me. I continued, expressing that if I didn't love her, we wouldn't be living in this house together. I emphasized that if I didn't think she was something special to me, I wouldn't be married to her. I recounted an unexpected call that canceled my meeting the previous night, leading me into one of the worst nightmares I could conceive. Roger, one of my best friends, if not my very best friend, showed up when I should have been in my meeting. My woman, May, greeted him at the door and took him to a room she had gone to some trouble preparing for a tryst, giving him a strip tease. I observed that she dressed her body to display something she hadn't done for me in well over a year. When I questioned her about it, she claimed the meeting wasn't important to her, but she had gone to a lot of trouble dressing, putting up her hair, and applying makeup, something she hadn't done for me since Hector was a pup. This indicated to me that the meeting was crucial to her, considering it a treat she had to prepare for. It also suggested that her time with me was ordinary and of much lesser value. I saw her doing things for Roger that she only did for me on special occasions, if then, and doing some things for him that she had refused to do with and for me. Tears welled up in my wife's eyes, and she blinked them away. She insisted that it wasn't like that, and expressed her love for me, emphasizing how much I meant to her. Seating myself on the bed, I gazed at her and stated that I wasn't sure yet what steps we could take. However, I mentioned that I planned to call Roger and Crystal, asking them to come over that evening. I questioned May about Crystal's awareness of the situation and then proceeded to dial their number. Crystal answered, and I requested their presence for a brief meeting that evening. While I was on the call, May handled the Chinese food delivery at the door. Despite having no appetite, I forced myself to eat, anticipating a lengthy and emotional night ahead. May idly toyed with her food, and for a moment, I almost believed her reassurances that it was a one-time occurrence and that she still loved me. Around 7:15, the doorbell rang. Before opening the door, I told May that I suspected there was more to this situation than she realized. As I welcomed Roger and Crystal inside, both flashed smiles at me. However, I couldn't shake the feeling that each of them shared a subtle, knowing smile with May. Roger especially seemed possessive in his gaze toward my wife, and I noticed May cringe slightly upon encountering it. As we all settled on the couch, I gestured for May to join them, pointing to the couch beside Crystal, but she opted for her recliner to the side. I rambled on about various topics, including the new monitoring system I had been developing. I refrained from disclosing its functionality or what had happened the previous night. Crystal and Roger appeared puzzled, questioning why they were summoned. Eventually, I broached the topic, jokingly offering drinks to lighten the mood. Everyone accepted, and I served each of them their preferred beverages: Crystal's white wine, Roger's Jack Daniels and 7-Up, May's orange juice due to her pregnancy, and what looked like my gin and tonic, but was pure tonic. I settled onto a hassock near the TV, needing to maintain some semblance of composure. Surveying everyone, I finally asked Crystal what her motivation was in setting up the situation. She appeared puzzled and inquired about what I meant. I clarified my question, asking why she had worked so hard to arrange everything. As I finished speaking, Roger sputtered and choked on his drink. Turning my gaze to him, I continued, acknowledging that I understood what he gained from it, but questioning if there was more to it. Attempting to focus on both women simultaneously, I switched my eyes back and forth. Addressing Roger, I expressed my concern about his reputation as a playboy, suggesting that one more conquest didn't seem worth the risk. He stumbled in his response, explaining that he was at home the previous night when my meeting was called off. He mentioned being in the garage during my appointment with May, and when I arrived to support his claim, he turned on the TV to show the live feed from the camera in the spare room, which I had just finished setting up before he came over. I remarked on the quality of the picture, pointing out the timing of its installation. May had her face buried in her hands, and Roger's face went pale. Crystal looked at me with a seductive smile. Continuing, I questioned the purpose of the whole situation. Crystal crossed her legs, and her foot began bouncing up and down. She asked what I thought it meant. I replied, mentioning her reputation and Roger's, noting that despite them being straightforward with us, I had received some comments at the last social gathering. I expressed relief that they hadn't said anything to us, but I anticipated that was about to change. Crystal confirmed that this wasn't the ideal way to bring it up, but agreed that it was time to address the matter. I glanced over at my puzzled wife, May. Up to now, I thought she was aware of this, but now I'm not so sure. May's friend and her husband, Roger, had been involved in a key club for the past couple of years. They met on Friday nights at Barney's Broiler. A group of them gathered in a back room for dinner, where each couple brought a house key with their address on it. They dropped the keys into a barrel similar to the ones used in bingo games. After dinner, the wives left and went to their own homes to get ready for some closeness time with a partner other than their usual one. Meanwhile, the husbands drew a key. As per the rules, each guy got to look at the address. If it was his own, he held it in his left hand, pulled out another key, and dropped his wife's key back into the barrel. Some guys might check out an address, and if it was with someone they had recently been with or didn't like, they'd draw another key. However, they could only draw twice. If they pulled their wife's key the second time, they were out of luck. The guys then had a drink before heading off for the weekend rendezvous. It wasn't just for a couple of hours or a night, it was the entire weekend. Crystal and Roger, being close to us, led others in the key club to believe we were involved in swapping with them on the side. Many other guys expressed interest in May, not just Roger. As I shared these details, the room fell silent, and I carefully observed each of my companions. May was gaping at me, clearly surprised and shocked. Crystal wore a simpering smile, her foot bouncing anxiously. Roger looked smug and somewhat relieved after hearing my description. Before we proceed any further, May, there's something you should know about your lover from last night, I said. May's face paled once again as I recounted the situation, and it was evident she didn't want to be reminded of the delicate state of our marriage. I mentioned that Roger was well endowed, and her face turned completely red. She buried her face in her hands, stealing a glance at Roger, whose smug look remained, accompanied by one of the biggest grins I had ever seen. I felt the need to address the condescending look he had given me before the night was over. I shared my understanding that Roger was considered the prize at these drawings. All the wives anxiously awaited to see if they had drawn the highly regarded partner for the weekend, akin to the way it worked for college co-eds, as you described. Glancing at everyone's faces once more, I added that May had already experienced the best. Roger was smirking at me, and when I looked at Crystal, she was smirking at May, who seemed to be sinking into her chair, looking at me a little sickly. Leaning back on my hassock, I took a long drink of my tonic, pretty bitter, but that's what my mouth tasted like anyway. Then I sat and let the silence build. Roger still looked very satisfied with himself, but it seemed to me that Crystal wanted to say something. I kept quiet, allowing the tension to build some more. Crystal began by explaining that their arrangement was a good deal, adding spice to marriages to keep the love alive. According to her, it prevented staleness and tiredness from setting in. She suggested that loosening up could bring a boost to our relationship, making us closer. Roger, in response, just grinned his usual grin. She continued, expressing the belief that it wouldn't affect our friendship and that it could introduce new ideas for the bedroom. Crystal assured us there was no pressure, urging us to think about it and stating that they would be there whenever we made up our minds. In response to this introduction and confession, I appreciated Crystal's patience, but made it clear that I hadn't discussed this with May and had no intention of doing so. I expressed disinterest in swapping or seeking another partner for lovemaking. I highlighted that May and I were intelligent, well-read, and imaginative individuals who didn't need unconventional methods to improve our intimate life. I shared my hope for enjoying our life together for many more years. However, my tone changed as I addressed a more serious concern. I pointed out that Roger didn't practice safe sex, and this troubled me. I emphasized that May, now pregnant with our child, would need to visit the doctor to check for STDs, creating a difficult situation for both of us. I explained that we couldn't engage in intimate activities until she was checked and proved negative to prevent any potential transmission between us. I made sure May understood the gravity of the situation. Looking at our former best friends, I expressed a sense of betrayal, uncertain about which of them had angered me more. Regardless, I conveyed that we would have to halt our gatherings for the foreseeable future. I powered off the TV, ejected the USB drive, and handed it to May. She crumpled several sheets of today's unopened newspaper, lit a match, and set them ablaze in the fireplace. After adding the drive to the pile, we stood together watching the fire consume and burn, until only black ash remained where the thumb drive had been. Turning around, I observed that both Roger and Crystal were now unconscious. I remarked that the chemical had worked before making a phone call to Lopez. 3 hours later, at 11 p.m., the doorbell rang. Welcoming Lopez, I pointed to the two limp bodies and confirmed that the package was ready. Lopez inquired if I had something for him, and I gestured toward the two individuals on the floor. Lopez went outside and returned with 7 more men. They picked up Crystal, and as they moved toward Roger, I asked them to halt. Retrieving a baseball bat from upstairs, I stated that I needed just a few swings. Lopez nodded and Roger was placed on the ground. I explained my plan to target specific points, kneecaps, ankles, and the two sensitive areas, all done in a few swift moves. May stood there, mouth agape. I expressed a desire to hear screams, but acknowledged that Roger was unconscious. The group took him away, and Lopez returned to sit with me after 5 minutes, thanking me for the samples. I responded that it was my pleasure. May remained seated, her mouth still open. After Lopez left, the night was cold, and May approached me, asking what would happen to our former friends. I responded in a cold, flat voice that they were going to Mexico to help some medical students practice. May questioned what would occur if someone looked for them, and I assured her that Lopez would handle it. I coldly mentioned that she had eliminated them, expressing my indifference to her feelings. I argued that I had no right to be judged and emphasized that I had ensured their usefulness to society. May was visibly shaken. I informed her that my earlier promise about us returning and having a physical relationship was a lie. The next morning, we would conduct a DNA test for the unborn child, and if the results showed I was the father, I would assist with the birth. However, we would not remain married. She wouldn't take any lovers until our son was 10 years old, or I would ensure she became very useful. We would file for divorce in the evening, with her getting the house and my financial support until she found a job. May nodded, expressing surprise at discovering this side of me, and I walked away, stating that I didn't know it either. The following day, we filed for divorce, and 3 weeks later, we received the DNA report confirming I was the father. Months later, we finalized the divorce, and 2 months after that, my son was born. I spent a lot of time with him, maintaining occasional conversations with May. However, I could never love her again. She adhered to the agreement, refraining from taking any lovers, and I supported her financially for 5 years until our son could care for himself. I didn't date during this time, channeling all my energy into my son. Lopez expressed his gratitude with a significant thank you gift, and no one came looking for the 2 samples I had sent.
Gentlemen, this is a story of deceit and infidelity. All those who cheat should remember that their dishonesty will eventually come to light, and they will face consequences. I got married when I was 23, and she was 21. We met in college during my junior year, and our connection quickly grew. It was clear from the start that we were meant to be together, so we decided to get married. After she graduated, I found a job near my hometown where I grew up. My parents ran a farm there, employing 8 full-time workers and 45 seasonal laborers. Both my brother and I were involved in the farm's operations while growing up. Let's call my brother Bill for reference. Bill, who is 3 years younger than me, opted not to pursue higher education and worked as a laborer on the farm for years, despite our father's attempts to give him managerial roles. He preferred being a farm laborer, doing his job diligently and receiving his wages. That's what he dedicated his life to until he tragically passed away from cancer earlier this year. The farm covers nearly 700 acres and includes 3 houses. My parents live in the main house, tucked away from the main road, which also serves as the farm office. My brother lived in a charming carriage house at the junction of the driveway and the main road. Meanwhile, my wife, children, and I live in a farmhouse about 3/4 of a mile from my parents and brother. To expand the farm and protect the farmhouse, my parents acquired the neighboring property through the Family Farm Corporation. As a result, all 3 homes are now owned by the corporation, and my brother and I lived there rent-free, which was quite advantageous. While my parents hold officer positions in the company, they structured it so that my brother and I would inherit the farm when they pass away. According to the arrangement, Bill is entitled to 45%, while I receive 55% of the inheritance. Due to my active role in managing the farm alongside my regular job, I was given controlling interest. Even though I didn't receive extra pay for this work, my family and I enjoyed the perk of living on the property without paying rent, with the understanding that I would eventually become the majority owner. This arrangement created a wonderful family atmosphere, and we all cherished our time living there. In terms of my children, my oldest is a 21-year-old girl, followed by a 20-year-old boy. We also have a 17-year-old boy, and our youngest is a 15-year-old girl. Life was truly wonderful for all of us. My marriage with Connie was filled with happiness and love. Our children were remarkable, my job was thriving, and the family farm was flourishing. With this background in mind, you can truly grasp the overall picture. Now let me delve into the matter that prompted me to share this post. Approximately 3 years ago, my brother received the devastating news of being diagnosed with cancer. Unfortunately, he had always struggled with prioritizing his own well-being and only sought medical intervention when his symptoms became unbearable. Regrettably, by the time his cancer was detected, it had already spread to various parts of his body. Enduring a tough journey, he underwent grueling chemotherapy and radiation treatments that significantly impacted his overall health. Despite the toll it took on him, he bravely continued with his work commitments. Earlier this year, we experienced the profound loss of Bill, and it was an incredibly emotional period for our entire family, particularly for me. Bill held me in high regard as his role model, and I was there to help him through the challenges he faced in life. One major obstacle he tackled with my support was his battle against alcoholism, which he successfully overcame 4 years before his passing. Additionally, he grappled with significant tax issues that needed attention and resolution. I played a crucial part in helping him navigate these challenges, since he often struggled with even the simplest tasks life threw at him. As a result, our bond grew exceptionally strong, and we became very close. My wife and children also had a deep affection for him. Even though they affectionately called him Crazy Uncle Bill, it's important to note that Bill wasn't unintelligent or lazy. Instead, he lacked the motivation and ambition to improve his life and circumstances. Over the years, Bill had several relationships with different girlfriends, but none of them lasted. Many of these connections formed with women he met at bars, often resulting in short-lived romances. However, there was one instance when he dated a genuinely kind-hearted woman, and I had genuine hopes for their future together. Unfortunately, his drinking habits eventually led her to leave him. My parents wholeheartedly accepted Bill, loving him unconditionally just as they loved me. As per his will, Bill appointed me as the executor of his estate, giving me the responsibility of managing the distribution of his assets. His estate included various possessions, like a life insurance policy, a modest checking account, and personal items such as his motorcycle and truck. After his funeral about 2 weeks later, I found myself at his home, handling financial matters and going through the extensive paperwork he had on his kitchen table. While organizing the paperwork, I came across a statement from a bank located outside our town. To my surprise, the account held an impressive balance of over $70,000. However, what truly startled me were the names listed on the statement. The account was in Bill's name, but my youngest son, whom I'll call Joe, was named as the beneficiary with the acronym POD, which stands for Payable on Death. As I went through the details, I felt confused. I couldn't help but wonder why my brother had chosen to set up the account this way. What was the reason behind designating Joe as the sole beneficiary when he didn't have a closer bond with Joe compared to my other children? In fact, if anything, Bill had a stronger connection with my other kids rather than Joe. My mind raced, trying to find answers, but I realized I couldn't come up with a logical explanation. After making this astonishing discovery, my initial thought was to inform my wife and parents, but I decided to hold off on sharing the news for now. The next day, I went to the bank, taking advantage of my role as the executor to gather more information. I learned that Bill had opened the money market account just a month after Joe was born and consistently made contributions to it every 2 weeks. As I pieced together these facts, I couldn't help but focus on the undeniable connection between Bill and Joe, which troubled and concerned me deeply. Thoughts about the possibility of an affair between Bill and Connie, and whether Joe might be Bill's son, consumed my mind relentlessly. These thoughts left me in a state of anxiety and obsession. That night, consumed by these thoughts, I returned to Bill's house. I was determined to find any clues that could provide answers. Hours passed as I meticulously searched through every file and document in the house. Finally, I came across something that would change my life forever. Flipping it over, my world shattered as I found 2 old photos of my wife. In one, she was topless, and in the other, she stood holding a beer, completely naked. Shockingly, both pictures were taken in Bill's bedroom. Overwhelmed by a mix of devastation, anger, and confusion, I remained at Bill's house for several more hours that night, shifting between tearful despair and seething anger. Connie eventually called, asking about my whereabouts, which prompted me to return home. At that point, I decided not to directly address her, as I needed time to think about my next steps. I even briefly considered ignoring what I had found, but that idea was quickly dismissed. How could I even think of such a thing? Those photos were from years ago, and my brother was no longer alive. I couldn't keep this to myself. So, I made the choice to tell my parents about what I had discovered, and I followed through on that decision. The following day, I took some time off in the afternoon and met with them at the farm office. I informed them about the bank account and showed them the pictures of my wife. It was crucial to lay out all the evidence. My parents were completely bewildered when they saw the proof, and they couldn't believe their eyes. They were deeply disturbed and shocked by the revelation, seemingly even more than I was. They asked about my plans. I told them I intended to confront Connie and, if the allegations were true, begin divorce proceedings. While they understood my choice, my mother advised me to give Connie a chance to explain herself, and to carefully think through my actions before proceeding. After our dinner, I went with Connie to Bill's house, saying I needed her help with cleaning and organizing. Once inside, I guided her to a seat and gently told her we needed to discuss something important. I handed her a packet containing the bank statement and pictures of her. I gave her the bank statement first. She looked at it and was surprised by the significant amount of money Bill had saved. I asked her if she noticed anything unusual on the statement, but she didn't, only mentioning the impressive sum. I then asked her to read the statement aloud from the top. She read the bank's name and address, followed by Bill's name. As she continued, her voice trailed off as she read the words, "Payable on death to Joe," our last name. She looked at me with a shocked expression, realizing she had been caught. She wondered aloud why Bill did this. I asked if there was something she needed to confess. She initially shook her head vigorously, but I pressed her, asking again if she was absolutely sure. Reluctantly, she confirmed her previous statement. With a sigh, I took out the photographs and placed them in her trembling hands. Her body froze instantly, and tears started streaming down her face uncontrollably. She pleaded to explain herself, her voice choked with emotion. I told her to tell me her side of the story. She was so nervous that she rushed to the bathroom, where I heard her vomiting. 15 minutes later, she came out and confessed to her involvement with Bill 18 years ago. She admitted that having the affair was a foolish and selfish choice, emphasizing that it lasted only a few weeks. Connie claimed she realized the mistake quickly and ended it. She assured me that since then she had kept her distance from Bill and only interacted with him when other family members were present. I asked if Joe was Bill's biological son. She confidently said, "No, he is undoubtedly yours." I asked how she could be so sure. She insisted Joe was mine, even if not biologically, because I had raised him. Her statements seemed contradictory, leaving me a bit confused. I then made it clear that our conversation was about her relationship with Bill, not my relationship with Joe. Despite her tearful pleas for forgiveness, I remained firm, offering no empathy or comfort. Instead, I got up from my seat and decided to leave. I told her not to return home until she had composed herself and looked presentable. I didn't want our children to see her in such distress, so I went home while she arrived about an hour later. Despite her persistent requests for a conversation, I firmly told her there would be an appropriate time for that in the future. We shared the same bed that night. However, when she tried to cuddle with me, I rejected her advances. Instead, I turned away and made it clear that I didn't want to share the bed with her. In fact, I wouldn't have slept in the same room as her. She silently cried throughout the night, struggling to sleep. The next day, I used my paid time off and went to the main house to meet with my parents. I told them about Connie's confession, and once again, they were shocked by the revelation. I confirmed that I intended to seek a divorce from Connie. When my mother asked if divorce was really what I wanted, I reluctantly admitted that it wasn't my preference. But after what I had learned, I couldn't trust her anymore and had no desire for any physical intimacy with her. After the meeting with my parents, I returned home and confronted Connie. I told her I wanted a divorce. Connie broke down completely, overwhelmed with emotions. She begged and said the affair had happened a long time ago. She insisted she was sure that Joe was my son. She pleaded with me, emphasizing her certainty. Once again, I firmly stated that Joe was not the main issue in our discussion. My love for him remained unchanged, regardless of his biological father. I made it clear that this betrayal was solely between her and me. The timing didn't matter. Whether it had happened 18 years ago or even centuries ago, the severity of her betrayal remained the same. Later that day, I set up a meeting with our usual farm-related attorney. Recognizing the seriousness of the situation, he suggested a divorce attorney who happened to be a close acquaintance. Without wasting time, I scheduled an appointment with the divorce attorney for that same afternoon, initiating the legal process. The attorney reassured me that the farm and the 3 houses, all integral parts of the corporation, wouldn't be at risk during the settlement, providing some comfort amid the chaos. Despite the infidelity, the attorney explained that our remaining assets would still be split evenly. This was possible because my parents had wisely organized the farm as a corporation, anticipating such unfortunate circumstances. They had appointed themselves as the sole officers, a foresight that proved invaluable in minimizing potential fallout from a situation like this. If any of my children were to go through a divorce while having ownership in the farm, their ex-spouse wouldn't have any claim to the farm. The attorney clarified that the farm's corporate structure doesn't grant ownership rights to my wife. He also clarified that due to my wife's lack of employment outside the home, I might be required to provide spousal support for at least 5 years, possibly longer. Even in cases of infidelity, spousal support remains mandatory, which is quite surprising. The laws seem to favor women heavily, as he pointed out. While we could consider challenging this in court, his assessment was based on his past representation of clients in similar situations. According to him, that was the expected outcome. I had anticipated and prepared for it. Money wasn't my primary concern. I simply wanted to end the marriage. After returning home, I broke the news to Connie and she completely lost control. She cried and begged for a second chance, but I repeatedly refused. Then I let her know that I would be talking to the children over the weekend. I mentioned that I'd speak with Joe one-on-one first and then gather all the kids together, including Joe, to inform them. Connie asked if she could be present during these discussions, and I firmly declined. However, I did tell her that she could meet with them afterward if she wanted. On Saturday morning, I approached Joe and let him know there was something important we needed to talk about. We walked to the creek on our farm, where there was a pavilion and picnic benches. In that peaceful setting, I shared the news with him. As expected, he was devastated and filled with worry. In his distress, he asked me if I would still love him if he wasn't my biological son. I reassured him, letting him know that my love for him would remain strong, no matter his biological ties. I firmly told him not to dwell on it, emphasizing that it wouldn't change my relationship with him or with any of his siblings. I made it clear that this was an issue between his mother and me, and he and his siblings were not at fault. I went on to explain that I would be divorcing his mother, emphasizing that it was solely because of her affair with Uncle Bill and had nothing to do with him or his actions. We spent a couple of hours sitting and talking. I let him know that the next step would be to gather his siblings and have a conversation with them. Sensing his need for some time to prepare, he requested it, and I agreed without hesitation. I assured him he could take all the time he needed to feel comfortable with the situation. Back at the house, we kept up appearances of normalcy. Though my wife's behavior had noticeably changed, the children didn't seem to notice as we spent most of the afternoon relaxing by the pool. We played games like cornhole and tossed the frisbee, creating the illusion of a typical summer weekend for our family. However, beneath the surface, a dark secret hung over us, waiting to be revealed. After dinner, Joe approached me and expressed his readiness to talk to his siblings. Unfortunately, they all had plans with their friends that evening, so we decided to postpone the discussion until the following morning. The next day, we all woke up early, had breakfast together, and attended Sunday services as a united family. As was our usual routine, when we returned home from church, I gathered the kids and let them know I needed to talk to them privately. On the back patio, my daughter asked if Mom would be there, and I told her that she wouldn't be with us at that moment, but would meet with them later. This immediately made the kids uneasy. With a heavy heart, I shared the news with them, and it was tough to witness their reactions. As expected, they first seemed disbelieving, then became angry, and eventually sadness settled in. I then explained my intention to divorce their mother, and tears welled up in their eyes. We had a lengthy conversation, going into detail about the situation, and eventually, they came to understand and accept my decision. My daughter, overwhelmed by emotions, expressed her strong dislike for her mother and her desire to cut ties with her. I reminded each of them that they're young adults and have the freedom to handle the situation in their own way. However, I advised them to consider their mother's perspective and not rush into decisions based solely on this one incident. Instead, I encouraged them to think carefully and remember all the positive moments they've had with her, because she's still their loving mother. After they learned about the situation, they all acknowledged that their relationship with their mother had been good, but they were understandably upset, and none of them immediately wanted to meet with her. To seek clarity, I proposed doing DNA tests for each of them. I made it clear that their mother had admitted to a brief involvement with Uncle Bill, but I intended to have the tests for my own peace of mind and to uncover the truth and address any doubts. I assured them that no matter the outcome of the DNA tests, whether they were biologically mine or not, my love for them would remain unchanged because they were legally my children. Later that evening, their mother joined them in the dining room for a highly emotional conversation. Although I wasn't in the room, I overheard fragments of their discussion. Ultimately, the children expressed their love for their mother. However, their perception of her had been forever altered, and it seemed unlikely that they would ever fully forgive her for what she had done to me and our family. This news was devastating for my wife, even though it was the consequence she deserved. After that night, she slept in the guest room until our divorce was finalized, a process that took almost 8 long months. Throughout this time, she pleaded with me daily to reconsider and attend marriage counseling, but I remained firm in my decision. 3 months after our divorce, we received an unexpected offer from a developer interested in buying the house where my family and I lived, as well as the adjacent 80 acres of land. The monetary value offered was substantial, leading my parents and me to make a practical business decision and accept the offer. Consequently, my wife, our 2 youngest children, and I relocated 60 days later. It was during this time that my wife found a 3-bedroom apartment in town to move into. The harsh reality hit her deeply during this period, causing her to fall into a severe depression that required multiple medications for treatment. As a result, I temporarily moved back into my parents' home. During this time, I decided to pursue my long-held dream of constructing my own home on the farmland. The opportunity arose, allowing me to bring my vision to life. Collaborating with an architect, we designed a beautiful mid-size log cabin with 3 bedrooms. After its completion, I now live in this dream house with my 2 youngest children. They also spend a few nights each week with their mother. While my ex-wife continues to grapple with her depression, there are some signs of improvement. She expresses a desire to reconcile, but I have no interest in rekindling our relationship. Nevertheless, I treat her with respect and empathy. It's interesting how discovering the affair completely extinguished any feelings I had for her, leaving me with a sense of obligation rather than affection. Our conversations now mainly revolve around our children, as I try to minimize unnecessary interaction. Despite the betrayal, she doesn't have anyone else here besides our family, so completely cutting her off is not an option. I still feel a sense of responsibility toward her. Fortunately, the DNA test results confirmed that all of my children are biologically mine. The relief is immense, considering the turmoil and sleepless nights it caused. However, this revelation does not alter my feelings toward Connie. The profound betrayal she inflicted upon me remains unforgivable, and I will never be able to forget or fully forgive her. I still don't understand why Bill set up that account with Joe as the beneficiary. My ex-wife insists that they never discussed paternity, and I'm inclined to believe her on this matter. However, it's strange that Bill would make such a decision without any clear reason. Maybe he assumed something, or perhaps he wanted Joe to be his child. Despite this ongoing uncertainty, I'm content with my current situation and the relationship I have with my children. Restoring trust with my ex-wife may never happen, but I still care about her and genuinely want her to find happiness in life. I'm not exactly sure why I felt the need to share this, but expressing it in words has given me a sense of relief, and it has made me appreciate even more how things have unfolded.
At the age of 51, I hold the position of assistant manager at a large warehouse complex, while my 54-year-old wife works as a real estate agent in Tampa, Florida. She takes care of her 2 college-age children, and I don't have any children of my own. A decade ago, fate brought my wife and me together at a business convention, and we've been together ever since. We share interests in traveling, going to the beach, and spending time with family. Giving back to our local community, volunteering at soup kitchens, and organizing food drives for those in need are significant to us. Making a positive impact on others' lives and contributing to society has been incredibly rewarding. My wife is socially active, frequently attending events and spending time with her girlfriends. Our bed life has been satisfying, but I occasionally felt uncomfortable with her tendency to excessively flirt with men in positions of authority. I distinctly remember an incident at a real estate event when she engaged in what I perceived as excessive flirting with a real estate developer. I voiced my concerns right after lunch. She explained that most of her interactions were work-related, and although she eventually apologized, I still had doubts about her sincerity. Over time, her outings with friends became more frequent, resulting in extended absences from home, lasting only a few days each time but occurring more often. Her group included my wife and 3 other women with varying marital statuses. As she told me, "I've always been someone who trusts completely until proven otherwise, and this extended to my trust in my wife." One evening after work, my wife called and mentioned bringing dinner home while unknowingly having me on speakerphone. Background noise indicated the presence of 2 other women in the car with her. During the conversation, one of the women asked if I was joining them for a trip to Miami. This took me by surprise, and I asked my wife who she was talking to. She explained the woman was addressing me. Despite my confusion, I replied, "No, I'll likely be occupied with work." Later, when my wife returned home, We had a heated argument about her uncommunicated plans to travel to Miami. She claimed it was a last-minute decision and that she was going to inform me, but her friend revealed it prematurely. My wife informed me that they visited a bar, and one of her friends had too much to drink. Her work as a real estate agent involved interactions with various people, exploring different neighborhoods, active participation in community activities, and offering help to others. However, as previously mentioned, she had a penchant for flirting. Her job as a real estate agent earned her an annual income of over $120,000, while my own earnings were approximately $40,000, significantly less than hers. It's important to note that it took her several years to reach her current income level. She invested heavily in preparing for her trip to Miami, spending a substantial sum on clothing, despite already having an extensive wardrobe. A few days later, she left for Miami, which was only a 4.5-hour drive from Tampa, planning to stay for 4 days. However, on the second day of her absence, when I returned home from work around 7 p.m., something unexpected occurred. There was a distinct knock on the door, and a man in a formal suit stood there, holding a large manila envelope. He addressed me by name, handed me the envelope, and said, "This is for you." Afterward, he left. Upon opening the envelope, I found a note with a contact phone number and the words, "Contact me if you would like to discuss the photos." As I gazed at the first photo, it showed my wife seated on a man's lap, engaged in a passionate kiss with his hands on her back. They appeared to be in some sort of nightclub. The second photo depicted a scene by a pool where my wife and a man were sharing a passionate kiss. At this point, I decided to call the phone number provided on the note. During our conversation, I learned that the man was a private investigator who had been hired by another husband suspicious of his wife's infidelity. His job involved gathering information about the social circle of the client's wife. Upon closer examination of the pictures, I came across 3 more photos that clearly showed bed moments between my wife and the same man. In that moment, a mix of anger, frustration, and heartache overwhelmed me, causing tears to well up. I called my dad and recounted the recent events to him. He advised me to regain my composure and strongly recommended that I refrain from revealing anything to her. I assured my father that I would remain calm and not utter a word. With just 1 day left before my wife's return from her trip, I consulted with an attorney online. During our discussion, I openly shared the situation and explained that I had evidence of my wife's infidelity. Unfortunately, I was told that in Florida, it doesn't matter because it's a no-fault state. The attorney then asked how long we had been married, to which I replied that it had been over a decade. My plan was to hire a lawyer the next day while trying to maintain a sense of normalcy at home. However, when my wife returned from her trip, it unintentionally disrupted my well-thought-out plan as she had 2 days off. So, I had to delay my plan for a while. On the 3rd day, she returned to work, and I left the house after her. While she was away, I reached out to my father and Kenny for financial assistance to cover my attorney fees, and they agreed to help. I hired a lawyer and instructed them to start divorce proceedings, citing irreconcilable differences as the reason. Afterward, I packed my belongings, and with my father's assistance, I moved most of my stuff to his apartment using his truck. However, I hadn't yet moved in with him. I intended to stay until my wife was officially served with the divorce papers. 2 weeks passed, and surprisingly, she hadn't been informed. Another week went by, and she was finally served with the divorce papers while at work. Following this, my phone began receiving messages from her, including questions like, "What's going on?" I was at home that day when my ex-spouse from SUNY B called me. I asked my father to be present in our house since I didn't trust her, and he arrived just 5 minutes before her. As soon as she walked in, she immediately inquired why I had filed for divorce and what had prompted my decision. I pulled out the pictures from my bag and showed them to her, explaining that these were the reasons behind my divorce filing. She was shocked, covered her mouth, tears welled up, and she attempted to apologize. At that point, I no longer wanted to see her and told her that we would meet in court. As expected, she bombarded my phone with calls and texts, suggesting options like marriage counseling before the divorce hearing. She hired an attorney who did everything possible to contest the process. My attorney mounted a strong defense, resulting in a favorable outcome for me. I received $60,000 in equity from the subsequent house sale, as well as $900 per month in spousal support for 3 years. We divided the furniture, but I chose to give it to her. About a month later, I learned that my ex-wife had cheated on me before, though I was unaware of it. One of her close friends had considered telling me about the affair, but felt it wasn't her place. Later, she expressed regret for not disclosing it and apologized. I responded that if I had known about the affair, I might not have been married to her for a decade. 8 months have passed since my divorce, and during this time, my ex-wife has sent me text messages almost every week, inquiring about my well-being. However, I've decided not to respond. I've maintained my phone number, choosing not to change it because it's my prerogative. Even when she mentioned that her children were curious about me in one of her messages, it didn't prompt me to respond. The pain from this situation lingers, but I'm fortunate to have supportive friends who avoid discussing that tumultuous period. I'm on a healing journey and have recently started therapy sessions. Despite the heartache, I'm confident that I'll be okay in the end. Mark, weighing 325 pounds, and Sarah, having lost friends to heart attacks, faced concerns about Mark's health. In short, she limited their lovemaking encounters to 4 times a year, tied to weight loss goals. These occasions included Valentine's Day, their anniversary, and both birthdays. Over 2 years, Mark shed a substantial amount of weight, reaching around 207 pounds, but contemplated quitting after losing 118 pounds. After all, the journey had been arduous. When Mark expressed his desire to quit, Sarah adamantly refused. This is when she issued the threat that serves as the inspiration for this story. If Mark quit, he would only receive closeness 4 times a year, prompting Sarah to seek fulfillment elsewhere due to her lovemaking needs. In the moments following Sarah's threat, the foundation of their marriage trembled. It began when Mark's head snapped up, and he looked at her with shock and confusion. The foundation cracked as she witnessed sadness and hurt in his eyes, a result of her words. The marriage's foundation crumbled as his emotions shifted from sadness to anger and disgust. Sarah realized immediately that she had made a critical mistake. Sarah had pushed her beloved man to his limits to fulfill her desires for weight loss, then threatened infidelity as punishment. She questioned her own actions, realizing the impact on Mark. Mark expressed frustration, emphasizing the tremendous effort he put into losing over 100 pounds for Sarah's sake. He accused her of using closeness as a tool to manipulate him, expressing disappointment at her reward of continued deprivation and potential infidelity. Mark believed Sarah had jeopardized their marriage, introducing chaos into their home. He questioned her trustworthiness and speculated about her thoughts of infidelity throughout their 2-year journey. In conclusion, he felt Sarah had ruined their marriage, leaving him uncertain about what to believe. Sarah expressed regret, insisting that she never intended to engage in infidelity. Despite her plea, Mark, with a look of disgust, questioned the credibility of her words. He conveyed his seriousness about the situation, and a few minutes later left the kitchen table, heading into the garage to contemplate the situation. In the garage, Mark declared his need for time to think, leaving Sarah in tears as she realized the gravity of the situation. She sobbed, acknowledging the seed of doubt planted in Mark's mind, understanding the challenge of dispelling it. Reflecting on her actions, Sarah admitted her lack of consideration for Mark's feelings. She acknowledged her greed and desire for more, despite Mark's previous efforts. Now, she recognized the need to regain what she had lost. Mark, spending about an hour in the garage, engaged in activities to occupy his hands while contemplating the complexities of the situation. He didn't really think his wife had cheated on him over the last 2 years, but he wasn't sure. Earlier in the day, he would have been sure, but now, after her comment, he just couldn't be sure anymore. He didn't know either if she would have cheated on him in the future. Earlier, he would have never believed it, but now he wasn't sure anymore. He said out loud, "I need to find out." Mark walked back into the house. Sarah remained seated at the kitchen table, visibly distressed with red eyes and a red nose, a result of her recent tears. Mark observed her condition, feeling a sense of regret, yet he remained resolute in carrying out his decision. He communicated to Sarah his decision to abandon the diet, informing her that he would restrict their carnal moments to the previously agreed upon 4 times a year, or even none at all, leaving the choice to her discretion. Mark warned of severe consequences if she chose to engage in relations with someone else, expressing his intent to inflict physical damage on her potential lover. Mark sternly addressed Sarah, asserting that any infidelity on her part would lead to an immediate end of their relationship. He emphasized that he would not tolerate staying married to a cheater and labeled her as a fancy woman, indicating his lack of tolerance for unfaithfulness. He declared his mistrust and announced his intention to closely monitor her actions, cautioning her to be exceedingly careful. Concluding his message, Mark mentioned his departure for a while, indicating his absence for lunch, but assuring his presence for dinner. He offered the option of ordering food if she didn't feel like cooking, leaving the atmosphere charged with tension and uncertainty. Mark grabbed his car keys off the counter and walked out the back door into the garage. Moments later, Sarah heard the garage door open, and she heard Mark's car drive away. Sarah said out loud, "Oh my God, I can't believe this. How could I be so stupid?" She began sobbing again and just sat there, wishing she had kept her mouth shut. An hour or so later, she got up to go to the bathroom, then went and lay on her bed and cried some more. When Mark arrived home later that afternoon, he found her in the exact same position. Like so many husbands who suspected his wife of cheating, Mark decided to do some detective work on his own. He thought the easiest way to start was to drive to the telephone providers and request a printout of call logs on their home phone and on his wife's cell phone. Both were in his name, so he knew he would not be having any trouble getting the reports. The landline phone company told him he could have it electronically, and they were able to upload the call logs for the last 3 years onto a CD for him for a small fee. He gladly paid it and walked out of the office with everything he asked for. Yes, he requested 3 years because he wanted to be able to go back before he had started the diet to see if there had been any motivation for Sarah cutting him off in the first place. Next, he went to the cell phone company and requested identical data. They hesitated at first, since it was his wife's cell phone number he wanted the data for, but Mark pointed out that indeed it was a joint account with his name prominently on the records, so they had no reason to withhold any information he might request. They offered the data electronically as well, for a fee of $20. Mark thought it excessive, but probably worth the money, so he could more easily access the information. He did make a note, though, that perhaps he would rethink his cell phone provider in the future. Arriving at home around 4 p.m., Mark saw Sarah laying on their bed, sound asleep. He decided to let her sleep and went back to their home office, locking the office door so he would not be interrupted. He sat down at the computer and downloaded all of the data from the 2 CDs into a folder in his documents file. He had already formulated how he would conduct his search. He was going to start with 2 years ago and compile a list of every telephone number called in that first month when he started his diet and when Sarah had restricted his closeness to 4 times a year, plus rewards for goals achieved. That would have been September of 2008 on their home phone. September had 96 calls to 19 different numbers. He found that using the format the phone company had provided for him, he could sort the data in a number of different ways. So he created a list by numbers, showing the number, the date, the time, and the duration of the call. Once he got the system figured out, it took him about an hour and a half to create that list for every call made from their home phone in the last 2 years. He was just about ready to start the same process on Sarah's cell phone data when he heard the office door knob rattle. The door was locked, so no one could come in, so he saved everything he had been doing and stashed away all evidence of what he had been doing. He logged off the computer and went and opened the door to find the most pitiful sight he could imagine. There stood Sarah in a seriously disheveled state, hair a mess, eyes and nose red from crying and sniffling. Every once in a while she had her head bent down and only reluctantly looked up and into Mark's eyes. She expressed deep remorse to Mark, acknowledging the hurt and anger she caused. Sarah recognized her own selfish and cruel actions admitting that she overstepped by interfering with his diet progress. She apologized sincerely, asking for forgiveness and acknowledging that the decision to continue the diet should have been solely his. Despite feeling the overwhelming influence of the situation, she pleaded with Mark to forgive her. Mark conveyed his forgiveness to Sarah, emphasizing that it was granted only based on the information available to him at the moment. He expressed his love for her and reminded her of the sacrifices he made during the 2-year struggle with his weight, including abstaining from closeness, all done for her. However, he admitted that he reached a breaking point and could no longer continue. Mark addressed the current situation, describing it as a gorilla in the room that needed to be addressed. He stressed the importance of knowing definitively whether or not she had cheated on him, as the uncertainty would drive him crazy. Mark outlined the conditions for their relationship moving forward, stating that if she had not cheated in the past and did not plan to in the future, they could be okay. However, he made it clear that he needed assurance. He held Sarah accountable for creating the mess with her hasty comment and threat, expressing his disbelief at her lack of consideration for his feelings and the damage it caused to his trust in her. Mark highlighted the need for her to deal with the consequences until he felt confident in their relationship. Sarah was hoping Mark would just forgive her and forget what she had said, but that was not to be. She thought, "I suppose I deserved everything that was happening to me, but I hoped it could all go away." She nodded her head slowly and resigned agreement and turned and walked dejectedly back to the bedroom and closed the door behind her. She lay on her bed again, not sobbing, but with tears streaking her face. Mark opened the bedroom door and asked, "Sarah, do you want something to eat?" Sarah said, "No, Mark, I am not hungry." Mark walked out to his car and drove off again to a place nearby called Grisham's. He and Sarah had gone there for drinks many times, and their food was excellent. He knew he could have a few beers and a greasy but delicious bacon cheeseburger. In the 2 years previous, he had not had more than 2 beers in a week's time and not 1 bacon cheeseburger. Tonight, he was going to give in and have what he wanted. He knew that he would never allow himself to get overweight like he had been before. But tonight, he was going to splurge and enjoy his dinner, even though his heart was breaking. When he got home, he went back to the office and began working on the call log from Sarah's cell phone. Because he already knew the drill, it was easier to finish the cell phone list, and he was done in half the time. After reviewing the 2 lists, Mark determined that over the course of 2 years, they had 3,482 calls made in total from a total of 45 different telephone numbers. He decided to sort the calls by telephone number and had some surprising results. There were almost 300 calls to his cell phone, about 200 calls to his parents' number, and a similar number of calls to Sarah's parents' number. There were close to that many to each of Sarah's sisters, and about half that number to his brother John. In addition, there was a scattering of calls to various friends whom Mark recognized the numbers, and a few to other numbers he didn't recognize. Going down the list, though, he discovered that there were over 200 calls to a number he didn't recognize, and another 50-plus calls to a second number he didn't recognize. Then he realized there were some calls, 30 or more, to additional numbers that were made over the course of 2 years. He assumed those might be hair salons, stores, church, etc. None of those statistics bothered Mark much, so he just noted them and went back to the 2 major unrecognizable numbers. Being the type of guy Mark was, he decided to refine his research a little more and sorted the calls by day and time. For those 2 numbers, the surprising results gave him the chills, and almost immediately, he was burning up with suspicion and anger. Every Wednesday at 11 a.m., Mark attended a staff meeting with his boss and other department heads at a local restaurant with meeting rooms. They convened in conference for an hour, took a 1-hour lunch break, and concluded their business by 2:30 p.m. or 3 p.m. consistently. Every week, at 10:55 a.m., without fail, there was a call to him on his cell phone. Yes, some weeks were missed, but Mark instantly recognized those were the weeks he was on vacation. But the rule remained. Every Wednesday at 10:55 a.m., at 11:05 a.m. every Wednesday, a call was made to the first of the 2 numbers Mark didn't recognize. He was burning up now. It seemed too much of a coincidence not to be suspicious. Mark knew at that moment that what he was going to discover would not bring him joy. Persevering, He looked at the second number and quickly realized that these calls were consistently placed on Fridays. On Friday afternoons once a month, Mark played golf with his brother and their best friends, finishing the 18 holes around 5:30 p.m. They would stop in the clubhouse for a couple of drinks before heading home, usually reaching home before 6:30 p.m. On those Fridays, he would shower and take Sarah out to eat. What angered him was that Sarah always called him just before he teed off to express her love and let him know she would be waiting when he finished his round and got home. Mark now understood what was going on, but he lacked visual proof or knowledge of the person with whom she was cheating. The scary part was wondering how long it had been going on, and if it started only when Sarah cut him off, or if it began earlier. So, he extended his investigation another year and discovered that the same calls were made once a month for the 3 months before he was cut off. Whatever Sarah was doing, she had been doing it 3 months earlier, but not as frequently. All he had to do now was figure out who and then decide what he was going to do about it. Mark thought finding out who would be easy. He ran a reverse lookup on the first number and found it to be a cell phone number not listed. He ran the reverse lookup on the second number and discovered it was listed to a Tony Batali. Of course, Mark knew exactly who Tony Batali was. He was Mark's trainer at the gym. Sarah had initially found him for Mark, so Sarah was calling Tony on the Fridays when Mark golfed, Mark thought. He noted the address in his call log spreadsheet and decided to go out again for a while. Upon returning to Grisham's, Mark had a couple more beers. When things quieted down after the dinner rush, he approached the rather attractive bartender Brenda, seeking help. He briefly explained the situation and requested Brenda to determine if the first number belonged to Tony. He dialed the number and instructed Brenda to ask for Tony, and, if it was him, to mention that a woman had given her the number as a potential trainer. If it was Tony, she should tell him that if he had openings, she would stop by the gym one of these days. Brenda, after taking the phone, inquired if the person on the other end was Tony. She explained that she was Jennifer, a woman she didn't know who had received Tony's name from someone at her hair salon. The suggestion was made during a conversation about getting in better shape. Jennifer provided some personal details, mentioning her age, 24, height, 5'6" and current weight, around 130 pounds. Despite feeling a bit scrutinized over the phone, she acknowledged that she could improve her fitness and happiness by reaching a weight of around 115 pounds. Expressing gratitude for the compliment, Jennifer inquired about Tony's availability. Upon learning that an opening had recently become available due to a client quitting, she expressed her interest. Jennifer indicated her intention to visit Tony in a couple of days to discuss the necessary steps to achieve her fitness goals. She thanked Tony and concluded the conversation, looking forward to meeting him soon. Mark sat there in amazement at what Brenda just did. She verified that it was Tony from the gym and discovered that indeed he did smack on women who used him as a trainer. She even verified that he had an opening because of a dropout. Mark thought that dropout had to be me. Damn. Sarah already called Tony to tell him what happened and to warn him to be ultra careful. The funny thing, though, as he sat there feeling lower than dirt, was the humor in what Brenda had said. He didn't know or care how much she actually weighed. She was hot just like she was. She didn't need to lose an ounce anywhere. Mark smiled at her and told her she was too funny, and that he thought she was perfect the way she was, so she better stay away from Tony. He said, "No one could have a more perfect body than you do, Brenda." Brenda responded to Mark's compliment with a beautiful smile, expressing gratitude and addressing him as a kind sir. She acknowledged Mark's attractiveness, describing him as a hunk, and expressing confusion about why his wife would seek companionship elsewhere. Mark, reciprocating the smile, acknowledged Brenda's words. Mark admitted that 2 years ago he might not have been considered a hunk, but he firmly stated that it didn't justify his wife's act of cheating. He thanked Brenda for her assistance, both in gathering information about Tony and boosting his deflated ego. Mark expressed his appreciation and mentioned that he should head home. He thanked Brenda once more for her support and understanding. Mark went home, and because it was late, he just went to bed. As he crawled into bed, he looked across at Sarah and was hit with a feeling of loss and disappointment. He didn't think he had ever been this low in his life, But he was also certain that before it was all over, he would feel even worse. Sarah had awakened slightly when he crawled in and said, "I love you, Mark." Mark just grunted at that and turned away from her and tried to sleep. Of course, he couldn't get to sleep right away and just lay there thinking for quite a while. He was certain that he heard a sob or two from Sarah, but she obviously had calmed down somewhat. In the morning, Mark woke up to find Sarah spooned against him, her body pressing into his back. Sensing his arousal, she reached around and placed her hand on him, expressing remorse for her previous words and requesting closeness. Mark, aware of his vulnerability, resisted the temptation, citing the need to get going that morning and the established boundaries. Mark reminded Sarah of the cutoff he had communicated earlier, emphasizing that such attempts should not be repeated. He left the bed, showered, and headed to work. Sarah, left alone, muttered to herself about deserving the consequences of her words and the accompanying emotional pain. Upon reaching work, Mark confided in his boss about the issues at home, briefly explaining the situation and receiving support. The boss advised him to take any necessary time off to address his suspicions. Mark's boss also provided the name of a reputable electronics distributor for surveillance equipment. Expressing gratitude, Mark informed his boss that he would be taking time off from Wednesday through Friday, planning to pursue his suspicions. The boss, understanding Mark's intentions, wished him good luck with a smile. Mark went to the electronics distributor's location and found out that his boss had called ahead and instructed them to assist him with whatever he needed. Visual evidence seemed challenging for him, but he felt recording was manageable. He acquired 3 top-of-the-line bugs with battery life sufficient to transmit many hours of activity to a receiver within a couple of city blocks when the operator downloaded the data. When Mark got home, a special dinner awaited him on the table, his favorite lasagna with garlic bread and sweet green peas. He thanked Sarah for the wonderful meal and excused himself to go and watch some television. Sarah cleaned up the kitchen and joined him in the TV room, being cautious not to push in too close at bedtime. She headed to their bedroom, giving Mark the chance to plant one of the bugs inside their home phone, ensuring a complete record of every conversation on that phone. Both parties in the conversation would be heard. Though nervous about bugging Sarah's cell phone, he decided to proceed without worrying too much. It only took a few minutes, and he was done. Now he had a source of information from either phone. The challenging part Mark faced was planting a bug in Tony's phone. While Mark already had bugs on Sarah's phones, he considered the possibility that she might use a different phone, such as a payphone, to communicate with Tony. To cover all bases, Mark decided to try bugging Tony's phone. Recalling that Tony worked closely with a well-built blonde woman on Wednesday mornings, Mark suspected their interactions and felt the need to gather more information. He planned to seize the opportunity when Tony was preoccupied with the blonde woman to discreetly install the bug. Mark envisioned Tony being so engrossed with the blonde woman that he wouldn't notice Mark's actions. He went to the gym and saw Tony's phone sitting on his towel about 10 feet from where Tony was with the blonde. It would be risky to get the phone, but he thought, what the hell do I have to lose? He snuck in, slipped the phone into his pocket, backed out of the gym, and went into the men's room. There, he easily inserted the bug into Tony's phone. The tricky part would be getting the phone back on the towel. When he returned to the gym, he could see that Tony was wrapping it up with the blonde. He knew he would never make it to the towel and back without being spotted. Damn, he thought. How am I going to do this? After a few seconds, he decided to try to slide the phone across the floor to the towel, hoping to get it close enough so Tony wouldn't be suspicious. It involved some risk, but he went ahead and slid the phone. Despite making some noise, Tony, engrossed in the blonde, remained oblivious. Fortunately, he slid it forcefully enough for it to reach the towel, hitting it hard and sliding underneath. It was perfect. Mark believed there was no way Tony could be suspicious now, so he swiftly left the gym. At precisely 10:55 a.m., his cell phone rang. It was Sarah. She said she wanted to touch base before his meeting. Of course, Mark never disclosed he was off work the rest of the week, let alone skipping the meeting. After about 10 minutes, Mark began monitoring the bugs using the receiver from his car. Tony's phone rang, and he picked up quickly. Tony greeted Sarah asking if she wanted to meet at his house as usual. Sarah expressed caution, stating Mark was highly suspicious and they might need to quit meeting for a while to avoid trouble. Tony grumbled, reluctant to give up their encounters. Mark groaned as he heard Sarah's response. Acknowledging the risk, she admitted that the first time they had closeness, she knew she'd do anything to be with him. She initially cut Mark off to enjoy their time more with Tony. Though she loved him, she couldn't take the chance now. She suggested they might resume their weekly encounters in a few weeks, but, in the meantime, Tony would have to be content with one of his other girlfriends. Sarah wasn't jealous of Tony's other relationships and proposed considering meeting on the Fridays Mark went golfing. She needed time to think about it and promised to let Tony know if it could work out. Mark had suffered enough, making him sick and angry. He was determined to get revenge, having endured Tony's advances even before he started the diet. She had used the diet as an excuse to enhance her encounters with Tony. For the past 2.5 years, Sarah had been meeting with Tony every Wednesday and on the monthly golfing Fridays, totaling over 100 encounters. Mark questioned how she could claim to love him while engaging in such behavior, and speculated about the possibility of other involvements. Regardless, Tony's involvement alone was enough for Mark to decide on revenge against both of them. Over the next 2 days, he devised plans, established contacts, and ensured favorable conditions for the weekend. Monitoring phone taps, Mark discovered that Sarah had arranged a beautician appointment for Friday morning in a conversation on Thursday. In the conversation with her beautician Janine, Sarah explained her desire for a new and closenessy hairstyle to distract Mark from suspicions of infidelity. She mentioned the intention to purchase provocative lingerie to further divert his attention. When asked about Tony, Sarah admitted she might temporarily reduce their encounters, but laughed it off, suggesting it wasn't a permanent decision. Despite the laughter, Mark felt devastated by the revelations, yet his anger began to drive him, burying the hurt deep inside. Tony initiated contact on Friday, proposing an immediate rendezvous with Sarah. She expressed her intense desire, but conveyed her reluctance due to the risk involved, asking for patience until Mark's suspicions subsided. With each conversation, Mark's heartbreak deepened, struggling to comprehend any love in their relationship. He perceived Sarah's actions as purely selfish, devoid of concern or respect for him. Mark pondered where things had gone wrong, but remained determined to carry out his revenge. On Saturday, after lunch, the doorbell rang and Sarah opened it to find Brenda, who introduced herself as a friend of Mark's. Brenda mentioned Mark's approval for her to spend time by the pool. Sarah, taken aback, agreed to show her to the pool. However, Brenda noticed Sarah's lack of a smile, and a subtle smile appeared on her face. Shortly after, Sally and Linda arrived, both informing Sarah that Mark had invited them to use the pool. They shared their connections with Mark, Sally having worked with him for years, and Linda having served them at Grisham's. Sarah, confronted with the presence of 3 attractive women, began to feel uneasy, contemplating various possibilities. The 3 women settled on chaise lounge chairs, applying suntan lotion to themselves. It didn't take them long to agree to apply sunscreen to each other to ensure they didn't miss any spots. Once they were thoroughly coated, they lay on the loungers and began soaking in the sun. Shortly afterward, they decided an all-over tan would be better. Each woman tied the strings on their bikini tops and dropped them on the towel beside the lounger. Sarah was upset and wanted to ask them to leave, but since Mark had invited them, she had to tread lightly, knowing she was already on thin ice with him. At 3:30 p.m., Brenda approached Sarah and took a seat, revealing that she worked as a bartender at Grisham's. She disclosed that on the night Sarah issued the ultimatum, Mark had stopped by for a few drinks and shared all the details about their situation. Sarah appeared startled, and Brenda expressed her belief that Sarah had made a significant mistake. Continuing, Brenda informed Sarah that Mark was now suspicious and actively investigating their situation. She conveyed Mark's warning to Sarah, stating that if he discovered past or future infidelity, he intended to be carnal with Brenda, Sally, and Linda for each instance of cheating. Sarah, shocked, attempted to respond, but Brenda interjected, adding that Mark also planned to question Sarah, and if she lied, he would be carnal with one of them for each lie. Brenda hinted that they found Mark attractive and were open to being carnal with him. Brenda, already aware of Sarah's past infidelity, anticipated Mark's carnal involvement with her. She also anticipated that Sarah, in an attempt to conceal her actions, would likely lie, leading to a busy time for Mark, satisfying the three women. Sally joined Brenda and took a seat, sharing that she had known Mark for several years and always found him handsome and sweet. Despite his weight gain, she believed he remained the same sweet guy she had known. Sally admitted to having a crush on him, which had only intensified since he lost the excess weight. She acknowledged the troubles between Sarah and Mark and expressed her willingness to pursue a relationship with Mark, stating that he could have her anytime he wanted. Linda also chimed in, expressing that she had been observing Sarah and Mark for a couple of years. She noticed the love Mark showed for Sarah, and she made it clear that she had her eye on them. Linda's statement suggested her interest in Mark and her observation of their relationship dynamics. Linda acknowledged Mark's kindness and consideration towards Sarah, expressing admiration for their relationship. She mentioned feeling fortunate to witness such a loving connection and admitted to fantasizing about being in Sarah's position. Linda acknowledged Mark's remarkable weight loss of 118 pounds to make Sarah happy and his transformation into a hunk. She conveyed her admiration for him and expressed a desire to have a man like him in her life. At precisely 4 p.m., as planned, Mark walked out onto the pool deck, observing the presence of Sarah and the three women. He greeted Sarah and commented on the women's improved tans. Mark playfully remarked on the women's beautiful bodies, suggesting they might give him a hard time. He encouraged Sarah to join in the playful banter and jokingly asked why she hadn't removed her top. Sarah, upset by the afternoon's events, reluctantly complied. Mark then posed 2 questions to Sarah, emphasizing the need for honest answers. He inquired if, at any point during their marriage, she had cheated on him. Sarah firmly denied any infidelity. Mark pressed further, specifically mentioning Tony from the gym. Sarah maintained her denial, expressing confusion about where such an idea originated. Mark continued to question Sarah about her involvement with Tony, mentioning their regular Wednesday meetings and Friday afternoons when he played golf. Despite Mark's detailed knowledge of her affair, Sarah, shocked, stuck to her denial, hoping he lacked concrete evidence. Each of the women present, Brenda, Sally, and Linda, sat with satisfied grins, anticipating the unfolding revelation. Mark proceeded to expose the evidence he had gathered, including phone logs from both the landline and Sarah's cell phone. He described the pattern of calls, pointing out the regularity of her contact with Tony. Mark even had Brenda call the number, confirming it belonged to Tony. Although Mark didn't possess pictures of Sarah and Tony together, he expressed his conviction that the weekly calls were not innocent. In shock, Sarah realized the extent of Mark's knowledge, understanding that their relationship was about to face significant challenges. As she attempted to respond, Mark intervened, stating that there was little to be said and nothing that could convince him of her innocence. Despite his deep love for her, Mark admitted that his current emotions, hurt, disgust, and anger, outweighed his love. Mark introduced the 3 women, Sally, Linda, and Brenda, explaining their connections to him. He described Sally as a longtime work associate, acknowledging her beauty and sweetness. Mark disclosed that he was aware of Sally's crush on him, but he never acted on it out of respect for his marriage to Sarah. Sally smiled, recognizing their genuine friendship. Linda's acquaintance with Mark began during their visits to Grisham's when she served them. Mark revealed Linda's fantasy of being with him, emphasizing her admiration for him. He complimented Linda's physical attributes, particularly praising her chest. Mark expressed his intention to indulge in the experience with Linda. Brenda, the newest acquaintance, was introduced as a seasoned bartender who showed empathy and compassion during a conversation about Mark's distress at Grisham's. Mark highlighted Brenda's assistance in obtaining information and forming a connection with her. As Mark spoke, Sarah teetered on the edge of a breakdown, visibly emotional. Tears flowed, and her breathing became erratic. Despite her desire to convey something to Mark, she remained silent. Mark, acknowledging the interest expressed by the 3 women, revealed his anticipation of enjoying carnal encounters with them, exploring sensuality in every aspect. However, he reiterated his commitment to not be unfaithful in his marriage and expressed the need to end the marriage with Sarah to pursue these relationships. Mark conveyed his reluctance to violate his pledge, and asserted that terminating the marriage was the only solution. Brenda produced divorce papers from her bag and informed Sarah, a bartender by night and a process server by day, that she was being served. Sarah, overwhelmed with emotions, broke into tears at the delivery. In an attempt to plead with Mark, she apologized profusely and expressed her love, pleading with him to reconsider. Mark responded, expressing doubt about Sarah's love, citing her actions over the past 2 years as evidence. He emphasized that the issue went beyond a couple of instances, believing it occurred over 100 times. The court hearing was set for next Friday, and after the legal separation, Mark planned to commence relationships with the 3 women. He suggested that indulging in pleasures with them might help him find forgiveness for Sarah's affair with Tony and understand the satisfaction it brought her. Mark expressed the hope that a lasting connection with the new relationships could provide the love and support he had believed he had with Sarah. Mark informed the 3 women that it was time for them to leave, assuring them that he would be in touch individually. He then went into the house to gather a few belongings, preparing for a stay at a hotel until Friday, when either he or Sarah would officially move out. Unable to form coherent thoughts, Sarah remained seated by the pool, now crying softly. Mark emerged through the patio doors, placed his suitcases down, and approached her. Sarah wasn't sure what more he had to say, but it quickly became evident. Mark reminded her of the consequences he had forewarned for her lover. As it turned out, when she supposedly canceled on Tony the previous day, he pursued a relationship with the well-endowed blonde co-worker he warmed up with every Wednesday morning from 9:30 a.m. to 10:30 a.m., his prelude before their rendezvous. It seems Brenda, Sally, and Linda will have a similar effect on Mark, hoping it transforms him into a love-making dynamo for them. By the way, the blonde was Gino Margarella's wife. Gino took offense to Tony's involvement with his wife, and he, along with a couple of his associates, subjected Tony to a severe beating. Tony's face is now a mess, with a few remaining teeth and some broken ribs. Gino even allowed Mark the privilege of delivering a significant blow to Tony's groin. The outcome? It's doubtful Tony will produce any more hot seed, and there's skepticism about his ability to engage in lovemaking activities again. Mark, of course, will deny any involvement in Tony's fate. Moreover, Friday, being his golf day, conveniently provides Mark with an alibi through his brother and friends. Wishing Sarah a great life, Mark informed her they would meet in court the following Friday. That day, Sarah was left alone in tears. Within the next 2 hours, she packed her bags and headed to her mother's place. The divorce process took 7 months, leaving Sarah devastated and sinking into deep depression. Contrary to what he claimed about the other ladies, Mark had no intention of following through. Instead, he found solace in 2 golden retrievers and ultimately discovered unconditional true love.